It is Wednesday, August 9th, 2023, and I call to order this regular session of the City of Bloomington Common Council. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Sims? Here. Piedmont Smith?
Here.
Scambalori?
Here.
Rallo?
Here.
Sandberg?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
And Volan? Nope. Okay.
Thank you, and let's continue. I'll invite Vice President Piedmont Smith to read our land and labor acknowledgement.
We recognize that the City of Bloomington sits on native land. The city, as well as city administrative buildings, are on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people, and we acknowledge they are past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We also acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in Indiana, and specifically Bloomington, resulted from the unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, in particular enslaved African labor. We acknowledge that this land remains home to and a site of gathering and healing for many indigenous and other people of color, and commit to the work necessary to create and promote a more equitable and just Bloomington. We move forward knowing and acknowledging our rich, complicated, and sometimes painful past so that we can learn from it and create a true land of opportunity.
Thank you. And continuing with our agenda summation, we have no minutes to approve this evening, so we will move it directly into reports, beginning with reports from individual council members. We then have 2 reports from the mayor and city offices. The first is the greenhouse gas inventory report, and the second is the Environmental Commission Air Quality Report. We'll then take up any reports from council committees and then come to our first of 2 periods of public comment. We'll take up appointments to boards and commissions and then move into legislation for second readings and resolutions. There are 2 ordinances there. The first is Ordinance 2314 to amend Title VI of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Health and Sanitation, regarding updating and increasing fees for service and harmonizing Chapters 4 and 5 of Title VI of the Bloomington Municipal Code. Second there is Ordinance 2315 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel, regarding amending 2.76.040 entitled Boundaries to expand the service area of the Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation. We'll then move into legislation for first readings. There is 1 piece of legislation there, Ordinance 2316, to amend Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Animals, regarding updating and harmonizing Chapters 1, 26, 40, 54, and 56 of Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code. We'll then come to our second of 2 periods of public comment. We'll take up matters of council schedule, and then we will adjourn. So with that, we have no minutes to approve this evening. Let's move into reports from individual council members. I will start on my far left this evening with Councilmember Volan.
No report.
Councilmember Smith, sorry.
No report.
Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes, thank you. Budget hearings start in a few short weeks on August the 28th. And in the interest of making appropriate fiscal decisions, I'm making the following requests to the Hamilton administration regarding the purchase of the west portion of the Showers building using dollars that were designated for police and fire. The decision to purchase was made on a slim 1-vote margin by this council in February. Since then, the City Council has received no information regarding the planning, the timeline, cost projections, construction obligations, and transparency of process. In speaking with the leadership of the Fraternal Order of Police, Paul Post and Jeff Rogers, I have been fairly well informed, but from their standpoint, what I have heard raises questions. This council and the members of the public, the residents of Bloomington, deserve clear answers prior to budget deliberations. Public safety and how we spend public safety funding is of paramount concern. Because the fiscal decisions we make this year will have implications for the next administration, it is critical that we, the duly elected representatives, know where things stand. I ask the following questions be answered in a thorough report. 1, the current 3rd Street BPD headquarters is 20,000 square feet. How many square feet of the Showers West addition are presently in the architectural plans for police functioning? 2, the last meeting that included police personnel, social workers, administration, and officers was June 1st, 2023. It is my understanding that plans have been changed since that meeting and that police personnel are no longer in conversations with the architects and the mayor. If that is the case, what are the plans for keeping the police personnel at the planning table? 3, how much of the allocated public safety money has been spent for police and fire to date? What are the projections at this point for staying within the budget for retrofitting showers to the professional standards and appropriate purposes for police and fire? 4, are there other City Hall administrative functions and offices being planned for that will take up square footage in the newly acquired showers addition? 5, there are 2 phases required in retrofitting this building: the planning design phase and then bidding for the construction. What are reasonable timeframes for adequate planning that must come first before estimates can be made as to how much the actual construction will cost? Is it reasonable that planning can be satisfactorily completed before the end of the year, or does prudence require more time in making fiscally responsible decisions? 6, what are the architects saying about cost estimates at this planning phase? I am told that the City of Frankfort has recently been able to build a new 28,000 square foot secure police station for $10 million. Where do we stand with the cost projections to adequately retrofit this historic building for public safety purposes? 7, what are the plans for the current 3rd Street headquarters? What is the assessed value, and what, if any, negotiations are taking place regarding its sale and use? Should this sale be fast-tracked before adequate cost estimates at showers are known and transparently shared? 8, what is the status for leasing portions of the newly acquired shower space? Are office rentals required to make the fiscal plan work? And if so, what does that do for the square footage intended for police and fire? 9, with the announcement of a boutique hotel possibly being built in the Trades District, what does this do in limiting parking availability for police vehicles? And 10, and this is probably the most important question of all, how much fiscal and planning information is being shared with Carrie Thompson? What transparency and process do we owe the public about a smooth transition during the change in leadership? Is the next mayor fully apprised of the fiscal picture with only 4 months to go in this administration? I can only assume that my council colleagues are as curious about the shower's fiscal picture as I am. Hard budget decisions are in front of us. If satisfactory answers to these questions are not forthcoming, I would urge my colleagues to join me in asking for a moratorium in showers planning and construction until such time as a new administration can absorb the responsibility of city planning for all administrative functions, including good stewardship of your public safety tax investments. I've shared a copy of these questions with Stephen Lucas to share with the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. Councilmember Rallo.
Thanks. I share Councilmember Sandberg's concern. These are things that were raised at the time of our discussions, and there has been an ominous silence from the administration about the project so far, which is obviously a very huge project, one that many of us thought the funds would likely be inadequate. But there are concerns about the budget and space for this and making sure the planning process includes the police. I don't know if it doesn't seem like that's being done at this point, and that concerns me. I'm concerned about the commitment to the 30,000 square feet, which is absolutely needed, whether that is going to be fulfilled, and it was committed to during our discussions. And I'd like to urge the administration to answer those questions posed by Councilmember Sandberg before we go into budget process, because we need this kind of perspective from a project that is so enormous that it really requires us to look at the entire package in terms of city finances, which is our responsibility as this body. So I thank Councilmember Sandberg for bringing those up, and I'll look forward to the administration answering them in the next few weeks, and then we can hopefully move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everybody that my monthly constituent meeting is this coming Saturday at 11 a.m. It will be a hybrid meeting with in-person, part of it in the McCloskey Room, room 135 of City Hall. And you can also join via Zoom, and that link will be available, or is available, on the council website, so bloomington.in.gov/council. And on the right side is the calendar, and that will have a link. So I welcome anybody to, especially District 5 residents, to come and chat with me about city issues at my monthly meeting this Saturday at 11. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sims.
No report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Flaherty.
No report, thanks.
And I have no report either, which takes us now to reports from the mayor and city offices, beginning with the greenhouse gas inventory report. Welcome. I was about to say that. So, but if you would, please introduce yourself for the record, and then let's launch in.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Sean Mia. I am the Assistant Director of Sustainability for the Economic and Sustainability Department. I'd like to introduce my fellow presenters tonight. We have Michaelan Lynch. She is the Sustainability Program Coordinator for ESD. We have Stephanie Hayes Richards, who is the Managing Principal for Gnarly Tree Sustainability Institute. And we also have Emily Giovanni, who is the Principal Consultant for Gnarly Tree Sustainability Institute, who is joining us virtually. We are here tonight to provide a summary of the City of Bloomington's greenhouse gas emissions inventory from 2008 to 2022. Greenhouse gases are gases that trap heat in the atmosphere. The most common are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. As you can see in the graph, concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have been increasing for many decades. Different greenhouse gases have different effects on the Earth's warming. Two key ways in which these gases differ from each other are their ability to absorb energy and how long they stay in the atmosphere, also known as their lifetime. This is known as global warming potential, which allows comparisons of the global warming impacts of different gases. Specifically, a global warming potential is a measure of how much energy the emissions of 1 ton of gas will absorb over a given period of time, relative to the emissions of 1 ton of carbon dioxide or CO2. The larger the global warming potential, the more that a given gas warms the Earth compared to CO2 over that time period. CO2e, which is carbon dioxide equivalent, is a metric measure that is used to compare emissions from various greenhouse gases on the basis of their global warming potential by converting amounts of other gases to the equivalent amount of CO2. For example, on a 100-year timescale, methane has 28 times greater global warming potential than carbon dioxide and is 84 times more potent on a 20-year timescale. So some common sources of greenhouse gas emissions are government, commercial, industrial, and residential energy use, transportation, solid waste, water and wastewater treatment and distribution. We are experiencing the impacts of greenhouse gases right here in Bloomington with more frequent and intense flooding. I believe we can all remember what happened on Kirkwood in 2021. Poor air quality. Here is a picture of our courthouse this summer showing the wildfire smoke from the Canadian forest fires. We are also experiencing more extreme heat days and increases in vector-borne diseases such as Lyme disease and West Nile virus. The Indiana Department of Health just reported a few weeks ago that West Nile virus was detected here in Monroe County. So this brings us to our greenhouse gas inventory report. We use standardized methods and protocols to calculate, quantify, and assess our community-associated emissions and their sources. In other words, we quantify the amount of heat-trapping gases released by human sources within a defined boundary over the course of a year. Greenhouse gas inventories are important because they allow us to identify opportunities for greenhouse gas reductions. They help us measure progress towards local, state, federal, and international climate goals. Inventories also enable us to aggregate greenhouse gas emissions data across regions. This is a goal of Project 46, which is the regional climate collaborative between Bloomington, Nashville, and Columbus. Greenhouse gas inventories can help to motivate community action and allows us to meet our reporting requirements. And so now I will turn it over to Stephanie Hayes-Richards to talk about the history of our greenhouse gas reports and the summary of this year's greenhouse gas inventory.
Thank you. So the city developed its first GHG inventory in 2005 based on 2004 data, and that inventory was led by the Bloomington Commission on Sustainability. The City of Bloomington Economic and Sustainable Development Department has developed inventories for 2016 and 2018. In 2020, our company was asked to do a backcast of GHG emissions from 2008 to 2018 to make sure that the inventories were using consistent methodologies for each year. At the same time, we also estimated emissions for 2005 and 2007, since a lot of the goals for GHG emissions reduction are expressed in terms of 2005 levels. And then just earlier this year, our team was asked to do an inventory for 2019 to 2022 to make sure that the same methodologies were being used for all years involved in this analysis. So over the years, the methodologies for calculating GHG emissions inventories have improved substantially. When the first inventory was done in 2005, the methodologies for calculating GHG emissions inventories were still being standardized. But then in 2016, those standardized methodologies were being incorporated into the GHG emissions inventories, but the 2016 inventory was not reproducible because the information that's reported from the companies responsible for gathering the data that's necessary to do a GHG inventory has changed a bit over time. So, but by 2018, the city was producing inventories that closely followed the global protocol for reporting and made use of ICLEI's Clear Path tool to make sure that they were using best practices in GHG inventories. So now for the moment you've all been waiting for, let's take a look at the GHG emissions for the city of Bloomington. So as you can see, total emissions of GHG gases has been a bit varied over the last 15 years. The good news is that GHG emissions in Bloomington have been decreasing over time. Specifically, there has been a 16% decrease in GHG emissions between 2008 and 2022. So it's no surprise that the lowest GHG emissions in recent years was in 2020. But since then, we've seen a recent uptake in GHG emissions over the last couple years. So within this bar graph, you can get a sense of how the different sectors contribute to total GHG emissions. And the next thing I'll do is go over the emissions in each of these sectors. So as you can see here, residential energy is the largest source of emissions within the city of Bloomington. That's a little bit different than other cities. So residential energy accounts for almost 27% of total emissions. Commercial energy makes up about 18% of emissions, and transportation accounts for about 16% of total emissions. Another key factor to look at is per capita emissions, and that's emissions per person in the community. And while the total emissions has decreased by 16%, at the same time, Bloomington's population has increased by 16% over that same time period. That means that the city's per capita emissions have actually decreased by 28%. And I do want to note that the assumption here around population growth has a big impact on both total emissions and per capita emissions. And so I'm going to explain for you next some assumptions we had to make to get at these numbers. So you're going to see here a very surprising result in the most recent census data. So if you look here, under the 2020 census, the population of Bloomington actually decreased by about 10,000 on paper in 2020. I'm sure we can all understand we didn't have a mass exodus of, of 10,000 people in 2020. What was happening is folks who followed population numbers for Bloomington were actually expecting that number to go up because the census survey was clarifying how students should be counted in the survey. And so basically the language they were using on the survey was that that students should count themselves where they live and sleep most of the time. And so that was actually creating some more less ambiguity around how students should count. But at the same time, students were staying in their hometowns with a lot of students were staying in their hometowns with their parents, and so they listed that address as where they live. And so what happened is they got counted in their hometown's census rather than that of Bloomington's. And so this created some anomaly with the data, but to make sure we could ensure that the GHG emissions inventories were consistent across the years of analysis, we had to make some assumptions about population growth here. So if you look at this line chart, you can see the yellow line represents, like if we had assumed that the population had stayed the same between 2019 and 2022. Another scenario would be that the population continued to grow each year, consistent with the past 10 years. And so that is what we thought was the most likely result. And so that was the population growth numbers we used in creating the GHG emissions inventory. So if you see here, you can see with the green line graph there, that's what we assumed that the population growth was in Bloomington during the time period. And you can also see the population projections for Monroe County that follow that same trajectory. Now, supporting this conclusion was you can see IU enrollment actual numbers here in the red line chart. You can see that those enrollment numbers continue to increase in 21 and 22, which supports the assumptions we made about population growth in the city in Bloomington. So the next thing I'm going to do is get into the emissions estimates in just a little more detail. What we have done to simplify things is we broke emissions out into 3 different categories: stationary energy usage, transportation, and waste and utilities. As you can see, stationary energy is by far the largest contributor to GHG emissions. So included in emissions for stationary energy, we included grid electricity usage data from Duke Energy, natural gas consumption data from Vectren and or CenterPoint, and IU's central heating plant numbers. From here, we can see that emissions from stationary energy usage decreased by 22% between 2008 and 2022. As you can see here, residential energy accounted for the largest proportion of those emissions. While there was a general decrease in emissions between 2008 and 2022, there was that little spike you see there between 2021 and 2022, particularly within the government energy sector. And so what we've tried to do is look for some explanations for that increase. And so the best we can come up with is that one possible explanation is that during 2020, government employees were working from home, and as they came back to the workforce, emissions increased as they continued to spend more time in the offices. So It's important to keep in mind what's driving emissions reductions, and this provides some more insights into that. So within the electricity category, emissions are based on two main variables: the amount of electricity consumption and the quantity of emissions per kilowatt hour associated with electricity usage. So as you can see here, electricity consumption actually increased by 8%, but at the same time, the grid electricity was becoming cleaner, so it reduced emissions from electricity consumption by 32%. So now let's take a look at transportation emissions. This includes on-road and off-road vehicles, air travel, and public transportation. So over this time period, transportation emissions increased by 6% between 2008 and 2022. As you can expect, the largest portion of emissions from transportation came from on-road, non-commercial vehicles. So you'll see there's a little bit of a spike there in 2019, and that's really just a trend that reflects the underlying Indiana Department of Transportation data for vehicle miles traveled within the city. So this graph shows that the drivers of emissions for on-road commercial vehicles, as you can see here, what was happening is the fuel efficiencies of the vehicles that were being used actually improved. So while emissions per mile driven decreased by 11%, and total emissions increased because the number of miles driven had increased by 19%. And then finally, we'll take a look at solid waste, water, and wastewater. That includes landfills and other waste, as well as city utilities associated with water supply and wastewater treatment. As you can see here, the emissions within this sector increased by 8% between 2008 and 2022. And methane emissions from landfills constitute the highest share of emissions associated in this sector. And the increase in this sector are driven by increases by population and increasing waste volumes. And so we'll just stop here for a second and take a final look at Bloomington GHG emissions broken up by sector. This basically shows what the same information we started with. At the same time, I wanted to note, while this inventory used standardized protocols and methodologies, it's important to note whenever you're doing a GHG emissions inventory, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of assumptions that have to be made to get to this result. So we need to, while this is useful information, we have to make sure we exercise some caution in making our interpretations of the data. So let's get to the heart of it. So one of the questions you probably have on your mind now is Bloomington on track to meet its goals for GHG emissions reductions? The short answer is yes, we think so. So if you look here, what we have is we have put on this line graph the Paris goals that are embedded in the Mayor's National Climate Change Agenda, which commit to a 17% emission reduction below 2005 levels by 2020, and a 26 to 28% reduction by 2025 relative to 2005 emissions levels. So even though emissions have been quite variable over the years, we have seen a clear downward trend over the last 15 years. And if we fit a trend line here that reflects the backcast inventory that we've done and carry it forward to 2030, it shows that overall the city is on track to meet its goals. So this is promising news, but it's important to keep in mind that reaching this goal is not certain, and it requires the collaboration of government, residents, businesses, and nonprofits. And so you probably recall from a previous slide that buildings and transportation account for 92% of emissions in Bloomington. There are a lot of opportunities to reduce emissions from building and transportation, And we know there's a lot of funding out there under the Inflation Reduction Act to take advantage of subsidies for improving energy efficiency and reducing operating costs. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn things over to Michaela Lynch, and she's going to talk about initiatives within the city of Bloomington to address GHG emissions reduction.
Just to let you know, you're approaching the 20-minute limit for this section. We're going to need to extend it for our second report, but perhaps you could condense a little bit.
I will do my best.
Thank you.
Yep. So thank you, Stephanie, for providing all that information, and of course for Gnarly Tree's continued support and contributions to the city's sustainability work. In reflection of our emissions progress so far, we wanted to conclude the presentation by highlighting the things we've accomplished both in ESD and citywide to reduce our footprint since the last greenhouse gas inventory. For those that may recall, prior to our 2018 presentation, the city had passed the 2018 Sustainability Action Plan. ESD staff had worked with Gnarly Tree to develop a 5-year framework for Bloomington's sustainability strategy that identified both short-term and long-term goals within city operations and the broader community. I'm going to skip forward a little bit on time. Following the passing of that Sustainability Action Plan, we conducted the first standardized greenhouse gas inventory in 2018, as Stephanie mentioned, as well as worked with IU's Environmental Resilience Institute to conduct the city's first climate risk and vulnerability assessment in 2020, which is currently undergoing a comprehensive update. In order to further build on the recommendations laid out in the sustainability plan, the city began working with Pale Blue Dot in 2020 to develop the city's first official climate action plan. That plan would take the recommendations identified in the Sustainability Action Plan of 2018 and provide a comprehensive roadmap of strategies for implementing them. Most importantly, that would also set the city's official emissions reduction target as a 25% reduction of emissions by 2030, with 2018 as the baseline, and the goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. That cap passed unanimously on April 21st, 2021. It was estimated that the cap implementation of all the strategies would result in benefits of upwards of $461 million in cumulative community-wide savings potential. However, that would, of course, not be achievable without financial commitment to its implementation. So perhaps one of the most impactful strides that's been made since 2018 is establishing a commitment source of funding for sustainability. So in 2022, the passing of the Economic Development Local Income Tax ensured that we had $1.6 million dedicated annually to implementing the Climate Action Plan. With that funding, we've been able to extend and expand existing projects, launch new programs, and invest substantially back into the community. To highlight just a few of them, the Bloomington Green Home Improvement Program was launched in 2021 and provides low-interest loans and bought-down rates for homeowners looking to invest in solar and energy efficiency, as well as provides $1,000 rebates for qualifying homeowners. Since its launch in 2021, the program's provided over $20,000 in rebates alone to Bloomington homeowners. Compost Up Downtown, which I understand Council heard about in great detail last week, was a program piloted in 2022 that provided 3 free months of composting, back-of-house training, and a comprehensive waste audit to 16 local Bloomington restaurants to encourage the practice of composting food waste. The program has helped divert 81,000 pounds of organic waste from landfill, which, as Stephanie recognized, is a huge source of methane emissions in the community. I'm going to skip the long descriptions, but SEAL is one of our longest running and most successful programs at the city, which stands for Solar Energy Efficiency and Lighting. In total thus far, the program has provided over $400,000 to more than 25 local businesses and nonprofits, supporting 22 energy efficiency projects and 15 solar projects. By the end of 2023, the program expects to support at least 15 more projects, of which 10 are committed to solar installations, funding a huge expansion of renewable energy in the community. And Zero in Bloomington was launched in 2022 as the city's climate action platform and targets residents and households. The platform lets residents register their households, calculate carbon footprints, and complete various actions to reduce their impact. Groups of households can register as teams, compete with other neighborhoods and organizations in the community. And as of this presentation, there are currently 185 households registered on the platform. In addition to the programs we manage on an ongoing basis, our funding has also supported a number of citywide projects that reduce both our footprint associated with the city's operations as well as community-wide emissions. This includes things like investing in publicly accessible EV charging stations, of which the city has deployed over 20, installing 2.1 megawatts of solar on city facilities, as well as donating panels and providing funding for an 85 kilowatt solar installation on the Bloomington Housing Authority, and working to invest in electrification of both the city's fleet and the city's equipment, which has supported the procurement of 11 hybrid vehicles and the replacement of over 60 pieces of gas-powered equipment with electric-powered alternatives. We really only have time to scratch the surface on the work that's being done every day to reduce our emissions, but we're very proud to highlight what we have managed to accomplish thus far. We recognize that the city has a huge role to play in supporting a transition to a low-carbon economy, and certainly hold ourselves accountable to upholding the commitments laid out in the Climate Action Plan, but we also recognize the powerful role of residential involvement and engagement with climate action. So I want to conclude by highlighting some resources for residents who would like to be a part of the efforts. The Bloomington Commission on Sustainability and the Environmental Commission are both resident-led groups that seek to support the planning and implementation of sustainability efforts across the city. To check for open seats, interested residents should visit the links on the screen. Otherwise, all meetings are open to the public for comment and attendance. We also want to take the time to announce an exciting future endeavor, which is the launch of a new climate action dashboard. The dashboard will highlight the city's progress on our goals on a consistently updated basis, allowing for more transparent and interactive engagement with the city's climate action plan and greenhouse gas emissions. We're working to get the dashboard put together and anticipate a launch in 2024. As noted on many of the slides throughout the presentation, we also have a city site for all things sustainability that highlight our department's work, as well as community-wide resources for residents at bloomington.in.gov/sustainability. Finally, perhaps the most important step residents can take is to better understand their personal carbon footprint, how they can reduce their impact, and what resources are available to support that. I want to again mention Zero In as a resource where residents can calculate their carbon footprint and have access to over 100 action items and resources. We understand that these things certainly take an investment, so we also want to highlight a handful of resources in addition to programs previously mentioned. There are a number of local, state, federal, and utility financial incentives available to individuals that can help reduce the financial burden of investing in energy efficiency or clean energy. All of these resources and more can be found on our aforementioned city website under residential rebates and financing. And with that, I'll pass things back over to Sean to conclude.
Is it possible that we're at a stopping point right now?
Slide, if I could just talk about some large capital improvement
Very,
projects.
very quickly,
Yes.
please.
If we want to make a large-scale greenhouse gas reduction in our city, we need to transition our city fleet to electric vehicles, which would be $4 million. That would require 160 EV charging stations, which would be another $3 million. We're looking into energy efficiency projects and decarbonization of our municipal buildings, which would also cost a lot of money. So we're looking into grants for those and possibly looking into municipal bonds for those as well. Thank you very much.
You rushed through that due to our time constraints, so thank you for that. Is it the will of the council that we take time for questions now, or should we move directly into our second report? Councilmember Volan?
Madam Chair, I would like to move that we extend this period by 10 minutes and postpone the second report to another meeting.
Is there a second? The second.
I moved that we extend the portion of this meeting devoted to reports by 10 minutes so that we can ask questions of this report, and that we postpone the next report to the meeting next week.
Is there a second for that motion? I am not seeing a second. Second? Did you have any additional comments? Or?
Yes, I am increasingly frustrated by the fact that this presentation example, like previous ones, was not given a time limit based on our constraints, and that we've been consistently extending the period for reports without regard to the rest of the agenda or the public's time. So I'd like to talk about that later, but for now, we're barely able to scratch the surface here. If they needed more time, we should have known that beforehand. So that's why I made the motion. I'd like to ask some questions while their presentation is still fresh. I'm sorry that they weren't informed that we have a time limit so they could tailor their presentation to us. But I really hope that leadership earnestly takes this into account, that this is an oversight that is very frustrating. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion on the table to extend this period until 7:20 and postpone a report. Councilmember Flaherty?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'll vote no on the motion, just because Mr. Caldy is here with us in the audience as well, intending to give the report tonight. I share some of Councilmember Rowland's points and frustrations that maybe we need to be very careful about the number of reports we're scheduling in a given evening. But I'm happy to follow up with questions in writing and even report back on them here. But on balance, due to the expectations of folks here to see us, I'd rather proceed with both reports tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Volin?
I appreciate Mr. Flaherty's concern, but part of the reason for a presentation like this is to raise the public's awareness. If we ask questions in writing, it's going to raise less awareness than if we ask it in person. Again, the presentation is fresh, and it's no fault of the presenters, either the ones who have presented or the ones who haven't, but it's about time that the council took responsibility for time limits.
Additional comments? If not, we have a motion on the table to postpone, or excuse me, to extend this period by 10 minutes and to postpone the Environmental Commission Air Quality Report to another session. Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
I just wanted to mention that we do have an innovation update report scheduled for next week already.
Thank you. So, any further discussion? Councilmember Volin?
Yes, it's been a policy in the past to give reporters time limits. If we believe that there's going to be so many reports that we need to extend this period, let's do that. But 20 minutes is ridiculous anymore. So again, I urge leadership to take this up at the next opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table. Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes, I will vote no because the report is here. They are in chambers. They have been planning for this, and I think we owe it to them to hear their report as well. So I would be willing to extend the time for this. I know that next week's agenda is equally tough. Having been in leadership, it is tough to plan for these things, and wish the presentation had been shorter, but it isn't, and I want to hear the second one this evening. Thank you.
Councilmember Sims?
Thank you. I, too, share the concerns of Councilmember Volin and Councilmember Flaherty. I guess I just disagree with trying to solve what is perceived to be a time problem this evening. I think that's something that's better done out of council session with our council leadership staff who does the scheduling in the first place. So I think that is warranted a discussion. I'm just not so sure it's here or now. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? May we do this by voice vote, Mr. Lucas? Okay. We have a motion to extend this period of time by 10 minutes and to postpone the vote of the Environmental Commission on Air Quality to the next session. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? No.
Nay.
No.
Roll call vote, please.
Roll call vote, please. Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Flaherty?
No.
Rosenbarger?
No.
Sims?
No.
Piedmont Smith?
No.
Scambalori?
No.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
No.
Smith?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Okay. That fails 3-6. Thank you, everyone. So we are, yes, Councilmember Flaherty?
I'd like to make a motion to extend the time for this portion of the agenda another 15 minutes until 7:30.
For this particular report or?
No, for this portion of the agenda, reports, whatever it's called.
Okay. In which case, that's not going to allow a lot of time for questions, if any. So,
Could, without objection, well, nobody seconded yet. I'll make it 20 minutes till 7:35.
Second.
okay. Councilmember Volin?
Be able to ask questions of Mr. Caldy when he presents. Where is going to be the time for that? Do we know how much time has been allotted for his report or how much time he's planned to make a report? Again, this is all entirely within the council's control. The council has consistently ignored it and ignored the amount of time that the public spends on reports, let alone on the meeting as a whole. This has been happening for the past 4 meetings now, that we've blown past our 20-minute limit. can we extend by more than 20 minutes so that we can ask questions? I mean, if we're going to take as much time as we care to, let's at least ask questions publicly. I'm tired of this. Thank you.
Councilmember Flaherty?
I'll just note that we normally set aside 20 minutes for the whole of the reports section, which includes council members, mayoral, council committees, and public. So therefore, with one report remaining, I thought 20 minutes was already sort of an extension and adequate. I take Mr. Rowland's points. I think he's not wrong. I just don't think, again, that it's maybe something we solve right now and that this is a reasonable balance on given
Point
what's
of
on the
order.
agenda.
Councilmember Volin?
Mr. Flaherty's incorrect. We have allotted 20 minutes just for public comment alone, not 20 minutes for the entire meeting. That's been my consistent understanding of the agenda all this time. If I've been wrong about that, then I've been wrong about a lot of other things too, and I'm not putting that possibility aside. But we have traditionally given 20 minutes to the mayor and city offices, 20 minutes to council committees or what have you, 20 minutes to public comment at the first half of the meeting. Thank you.
We have a motion on the table to extend this section of reports by 20 minutes to what would now be 7:37. Is there any further comment? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have that. This period of time is extended until 7:37. Does council wish to ask questions of the greenhouse gas inventory report, or shall we move directly to the air quality report? I'd like to suggest we move forward.
Ms. Mia still had a slide.
Oh, Ms. Mia, you still had a slide, or, yeah, she finished the slides.
Oh.
Okay. Councilmember Volin.
A quick question about the data, which I was very happy to see presented about the student population in the census. And what I wanted to know was in the slide that I'm sorry, I forget your name, but in the slide where you presented the 2021 and 2022 population of IU, those figures have gone up significantly. Did you take the data point that was all students at the Bloomington campus, or students who are physically present and not wholly online? Because there are two stats that IU tracks separately in their reporting.
Sorry, thank you for that. So this was IU enrollment for Bloomington, yes.
Okay, again, I'm talking about a more specific data point, which is the enrollment for Bloomington includes people who are entirely online. That figure is now several thousand people a year. The in-person enrollment of people are physically present in Bloomington is a separate statistic that IU tracks.
Yes.
And it's on the order of 43 to 44,000, at least in the last time I checked. Are these numbers reflecting every enrollment or just people in Bloomington?
Is it possible to unmute Emily Giovanni, who's online? Because I think she would have a better response to that question.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you very well. I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone.
Give me just a second.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Still coming through very softly.
How about now?
While we're working on that technology, do we want to go to a second question in the interest of time? Councilmember Rallo, please go ahead.
Yes, my question is that I appreciate the report, appreciate the standardization. I realize we're comparing this to a lot of cities around the country or world. I support the metrics and so forth. But somewhere out there, there is an aggregate amount of CO2, and we're not accounting for a lot of it, right? In fact, it would be very complicated to account for a lot of it. It might even require artificial intelligence to account for it. So for instance, but it's important to me because we have a lot of imports to the community, and all those have energy, use energy, embodied energy, and so forth. That completely is left out of any idea of how much carbon emissions we produce. But if we were to, say, replace a significant portion of our food diet with local imports, organically grown, so forth, that would cut emissions tremendously from at least that sector. So I just wonder what fraction of this is the total in that aggregate picture. Has there been an estimation of that?
So the inventory that we did only accounts for Scope 1 and Scope 2, and that's direct emissions associated with the building operation and the electricity that's generated by the utilities. It doesn't include Scope 3 emissions, which I believe you're talking about, which would be the CO2 emissions embedded in the things that we purchase. And that would be a bit of a different exercise, but I mean, it's, I recognize your point's valid. It's just, that's a bit more effort.
Are we capturing with these metrics?
That's
out of the
that's not
aggregate?
captured. So the emissions associated with product use, that's not captured here.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, we're talking about, I'm just asking, there's an aggregate amount of CO2,
Okay,
and it is apparently addressed in scope 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever.
yeah.
And with these metrics, how much are we capturing of that aggregate?
Like what percentage?
Yeah, is it 40, 50, 60%?
I am not sure, but I'd be happy to investigate that further and to email you about that. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry about that.
Not audibly.
She is researching it right now. She indicated it's historical student enrollment for the fall term. She's double checking whether that includes online enrollment.
Say that that figure has diverged since 2013 when IU started reporting people who are fully online, and that number has been diverging every year. That figure is now 4,000 to 5,000 students out of 48,000 or so who are registered. I would urge you very strongly to look for that particular statistic because we want to reflect the people who are physically here for a GHG report. So I would urge you to at least check that and issue some kind of amendment to the report if you find that it affects your numbers at all.
It wouldn't. It's the emissions inventory just reflects the census numbers. So we just use the numbers for IU student enrollment to reflect as another source of data, just to show that the validity of our population projections.
I agree with you that the census was a major fiasco for college towns like Bloomington because of exactly what you said, and I was very glad to hear you report that to show that this is going to be a problem until the next census.
Yes, it will. It'd be a problem for 10 years, which is why we chose to ignore the data and make our own
Very
projections.
good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your reports and for your patience with our questions. And one more?
The question I wanted to ask is how are the emissions calculated and what was the boundary? What are the boundaries of, was it Monroe County? And then how was that kind of calculated?
It was City of Bloomington, and there are certain instances like the airport is located outside the city limits, but it's used by the City of Bloomington residents. And so what we did is we estimated a number of emissions we believed that were attributable to the City of Bloomington residents. So there were some projections made on that, but it's for the City of Bloomington only, not Monroe County.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to
And
make
same thing with
understand.
the landfill data. It's all the landfill from Monroe County goes, to the same landfill, and we made some projections on what percentage was attributable to the residents of Bloomington.
Thank you. And probably the increase in government pollution or emissions is probably due to the hot air coming from the city government, right? Just kidding, just
In the
kidding.
interest of time, may we move on?
Thank you.
Council members. Ms. Maya, thank you to you and your team for the report very much. So let's move quickly. Mr. Caldy, welcome. Thank you for your patience with our process this evening.
Okay. All right, thank you to the council for making time for this report. I can keep it very brief. I wasn't really planning for more than 10 minutes anyway and was hoping to have time for questions. I just want to start by saying the full report can be found at bloomington.in.gov/boards/environment/reports. To introduce the topic, air pollution causes harm to people's health and to the environment, even without visible pollutants, such as were very evident in early to mid-July, given the Canadian wildfire smoke. Even when it's invisible, even at very low levels, it can cause harm to humans, particularly the most vulnerable populations. It would include the elderly, children, and people with pre-existing conditions, either heart or lung conditions are at the greatest risk. Also, there's an environmental justice issue here in that concentrations are often worse in low-income neighborhoods or near industrial sources of pollution. This slide is a little bit dense, but I just wanted to identify the EPA standards in micrograms per cubic meter of air for particulate matter or fine particulate matter, PM 2.5 pollution. In 2021, the World Health Organization, in light of lots of new evidence and lots of new methods, decided that they believe the standards should be lower, and I wanted to reflect that here, showing the primary PM 2.5 being reduced from 12 to 5 for the annual, and from 35 to 15 for any 24-hour period. Don't want to go into too much detail on the numbers here for time's sake. Monitoring in Bloomington is being done for two different ambient air pollutants. One is the PM pollution, or the particulate matter pollution, which is being gathered at Binford Elementary. The data, continuous data for a very long span of time, they've asked to be excluded due to poor measurement. They've replaced the monitor at that site twice, most recently, I believe, just last year. But using the intermittent data for recent years, it shows we're well within the EPA's national ambient air quality standards for both daily and for annual particulate matter pollution. Ozone is monitored in nearby Helmsburg, which is in Brown County, technically in Indy's metropolitan statistical area instead of ours, but since it is downwind, it is considered a good representative measure of ozone, more so than the Plummer location in Greene County, which was what was used prior to 2020. But again, our numbers are within the EPA standards in terms of ozone as well. I took this from the EPA website right around the beginning of August, just to show how this year, mostly due to the Canada wildfires, we've seen a lot more air pollution than we're accustomed to. This is fine particulate, once again, PM 2.5. Climate impacts air pollution in a number of ways. Two of the most obvious moving forward are going to be wildfires, because the seasons seem to be getting longer and more intense for wildfires nationwide and worldwide as well. The smoke contains thousands of individual compounds. It varies based on what has burned, how hot the fire has been, and how far the smoke has traveled since the source to determine what would actually be in the smoke in any given area. But regardless, immense amounts of fine particulate is going to be included. It's obviously more than just our local pollutants causing it. In 2020, we saw spikes. We saw our sky turn kind of yellow from the California wildfires, and I saw an air quality index as high as 271, which is very unhealthy. It was top 5 in the world on July 12th, according to airnow.gov. Something that's out of our controls because Air pollutants know no physical boundaries. Another issue that we'll have to contend with long-term is extreme heat. Longer, hotter days, and for that matter, hotter nights, causes an increase in demand for air conditioning and electricity in general, which causes us to activate our oldest and most inefficient plants. They, depending on the makeup of the coal or whatever fuel is being used, there are again thousands of compounds that are being emitted, including heavy metals and pollutant gases, and again, lots of particulate matter. Health risks are compounded when extreme heat and smoke or PM pollution combine. A study in California found that on days that are very hot and have bad air pollution, that mortality risk increases 36%. Basically, what can we do? I wanted to stress that as a city, from a policy standpoint at least, any action done to accelerate our efforts to reduce reliance on fossil fuels is sort of a policy win-win. Utilization of renewable energy sources, along with efforts to decarbonize transportation, would have a significant impact on both climate change and air quality. Since they're so interconnected, these policies that reduce dependence on fossil fuels can simultaneously combat climate change and enable people to live longer and healthier lives. What we can do in terms of monitoring air pollution, I'm hoping that the City of Bloomington desires to expand monitoring beyond what IDEM does. There are a lot of different pollutants we could measure, but even just fine particulate, a network of low-cost sensors could go a long way to let us know what the spatial distribution, of air pollutants within the city are. And I hope that there is political will to look into this in the future. This isn't really covered in the report. This is from the EPA quality assurance process. Essentially, when you set up a network, you determine what it is you're looking for, what question you're trying to answer. This can be done in various scales or different scope, whether it's wanting to see how air pollution compares on one side of a busy street to another versus how in the summer versus the winter. You can set things up all different ways depending on what you're trying to measure. A lot of planning, setup, data collection, including data management systems to track the data. Decisions need to be made about how to make it available, whether residents can check it instantly, and then how you want to adjust the network as well, depending on, again, what it is you're trying to achieve. With that, I was hoping there was time for discussion. Thank you again for making time for this presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Caldy. We have about 4 minutes or so. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Caldy and the Environmental Commission for this report. So my main question is, with the particulate matter monitoring at Binford Elementary, it looks like we were under the maximum safe levels per the EPA, but not per the WHO. Am I seeing that correctly?
That's correct. The World Health Organization is recommending considerably lower levels than not just the EPA, but virtually any country's standards. They believe that in light of new measurements, new studies, that air pollution, even at very low levels, is more of a threat than people may have realized, especially in low-income areas. And so according to their new numbers, I believe they said nearly 98% of the world is above what they believe to be the healthy limits.
All right, well, it's good to face facts at least. Thank you.
Additional questions? Councilmember Volin.
Thanks for the presentation. In response to your interest in a citywide air quality network, can you give us a rough sense of how many sensors would be adequate, how expensive they are, and roughly how much would it cost to do?
Absolutely. It's actually a really tough question to answer because there are so many possibilities. There isn't, that I'm aware of, a standard for, say, how many monitors you'd put per square mile or where exactly you want to prioritize putting them. As far as equity considerations go, there was a study in California that expressed that putting them at schools is a good way to, because they're often evenly distributed around a community. And also you have vulnerable populations attending, which makes kind of a dual interest in that one. I tried to plot that out on a map of Bloomington, and there are noteworthy gaps, so I would want to do more than just schools if I were doing a part of the design. As far as the sensors go, there are many, many choices in, instead of the very expensive reference quality monitors that IDEM uses, we have what they call low-cost sensors, which truly can be anywhere up to $3,000, but a lot of them, like Purple Air is used in a lot of places. They cost about $230 per, and there's siting requirements, but again, it depends on how many you want to have, where you want to have them, what data management systems you're using to compile and track, and so on.
So there's roughly 20 schools in MCCSC, 25, I don't know the exact number.
I think I saw 24.
A handful in RBB. We're talking about 30, 35 schools, maybe 50 sensors, anywhere between $300 and $3,000. So it's anywhere from $15,000 to $150,000. Is that a good ballpark?
Yep, it is. Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable math. It's just, it depends on where people want to site them, just what frequency we want to use, what density we want to measure.
If you
But
can
yes.
make some recommendations, I, for one, will start looking for money to do it. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Mr. Cawley, thank you so much for your report and for fielding some questions. We are at our agreed upon time. Let's move forward. Are there any reports from council committees? Seeing none, that brings us to our first of two periods of public comment. This is for items not on our legislative agenda this evening. May I have a show of hands here in chambers of those who would like to offer comment? I'm just seeing one hand. Mr. Lucas, could you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak, you can let us know by using the raise hand feature, which you can find in the control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. And if you're not able to locate that, you can also send a chat to the meeting host to let us know you'd like to speak.
Are you seeing any takers?
Immediately, no.
Okay. Let's go with 5 minutes then. And I'm still only seeing one here in chambers. Welcome, if you would. Please share your name for the record and sign in, and then you'll have 5 minutes. You'll see timers up on screen.
Good evening, council members. Paul Post, President FOP, Lodge 88. I had planned for 3 minutes, so I'm glad I have 5. Tonight we heard a very valid and well-needed statement from council members Sandberg and Rallo regarding the state of the Showers West project. The FOP appreciates their listening to our concerns and bringing them out for the public to hear. On June 1st, BPD officers and staff participated in a planning meeting with the architectural team regarding the Showers West project. After a lengthy discussion on actual needs, this team took photographs of the layout suggestions made by the participants and staff with the promise to bring back detailed plans and have further meetings with the officers. That has never happened. 6 weeks later, when the FOP asked directly for an update, we were told that Mayor Hamilton had been having meetings with the architect team and had made his own revisions to the plans. When we asked to see these plans, the architects told us we would have to speak to the mayor for them. Not exactly a very transparent process. We still have not been able to see any of these Mayor Hamilton updated plans, so we have no idea where this project actually stands. If you have not seen any of the plans or been kept in the loop, as previously promised by the mayor earlier this year, we highly encourage you to start demanding some answers from Mayor Hamilton and his handpicked architect. Back in April, when we finally got a sit-down with the architect, I asked directly about the timeline for this project. The architect told me he believed the planning could be fully completed by October and construction underway before the new year. Considering the years of planning being spent on projects like the Hopewell neighborhood or the Walnut College corridor project, that answer seemed extraordinarily fast to us. I asked that man if it was their professional opinion, based on their vast experience of never having built a police station, or if they were given October as a goal by Mayor Hamilton. After some guilty looks all around, he finally admitted that it was Mayor Hamilton who told him then set that date. Apparently we're on some sort of compressed timeline here. Council members, there's no reason a project of this magnitude should be rushed into without doing full due diligence and having full understanding of the financial repercussions of Mayor Hamilton's behavior. You were sold on the idea that this was a public safety project funded with public safety dollars. Why then are the public safety professionals getting so little participation in this process? It's perfectly reasonable for you to ask some hard fiscal questions about this prior to the upcoming budget sessions. You need to hear the truth. We fully support the idea of a moratorium on any further planning and building at the Showers West project until these questions have been fully answered to your satisfaction. We fully support having the incoming administration have a chance to participate in a meaningful way as well. If this building is truly to serve the citizens of Bloomington for the next 30 to 50 years, we should be putting our best efforts into it, not rushing into something that seems to be solely at the behest of an outgoing mayor on a timeline that will force corners to be cut and create financial quicksand for the incoming administration. Thank you, council members, for your time tonight. We hope that your questions get answered because no one seems to be listening to us. Thank you.
Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone on Zoom?
No hands raised, but I do have a comment from Sam Dove that was sent via chat that I can read.
Please go ahead.
Briefly. Sam says, the City of Bloomington encourages local artists of color to apply for participation in the 5th Annual Bloomington Blackie Brown Arts Festival. The two-day event will take place Friday, September 8 at the 4th Street Garage Storefront, kicking off with a gallery exhibit from 6 to 9 p.m. and a film screening starting at 9 p.m. On Saturday, September 9, at the Switchyard Park Pavilion, the Blackie Brown Art Market will open from 1 to 3 p.m. with performances beginning at 4 p.m. The festival seeks to raise and expand art appreciation, create a space that affirms persons of color in the community, and provide a medium for local talent to showcase visual and performing arts in an environment that engages the audience with artists and their work while enhancing Bloomington's spirit of inclusion. The festival is supported by the City of Bloomington's Commission on Hispanic and Latino Affairs and Safe and Civil City program, part of the Community and Family Resources Department, along with the Bloomington Arts Commission.
And
See one additional commenter on Zoom,
okay, let's go to that person.
Jim Shelton.
Mr. Shelton, welcome. If you would, please confirm your name for the record, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Yes, my name is Jim Shelton. I'm with the Chamber, but I'm speaking right now, and I'll be brief on behalf of...
Mr. Shelton, hold on just a minute. Mr. Lucas, can you adjust the volume up, please? Or work whatever magic you... Mr. Shelton, go ahead.
Hi, yes, my name is Jim Shelton. I'm speaking on behalf of Court-Appointed Special Advocates of CASA. Just wanted to quickly update you again in the community that CASA is having their fall training starting in just over a month. It'll be from September 19th to October 19th, and the format is different from what it has been in the past. It'll be in the mornings instead of the evenings. So it'll be on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings from 10 to 1 for the period that I just outlined. The applications to be part of the training will be due on September the 8th. So you can go to monroecountycasa.org, click on the volunteer link, you'll see a drop-down menu, and you can go through it and find a lot of different information. The orientation and training page will provide a bunch. And then you can actually click on I want to apply and apply for the consideration to be in the training right online. So I bring that to public's attention. We do need more people to volunteer to help work with the children who are in the court system because their parents have abused or neglected them. And this how you would get started down the road to do that. It's very satisfying and very, very needed. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else on Zoom?
No, I don't believe so.
And I don't see anyone else in chambers with a request to speak, so that'll conclude our first of 2 periods of public comment. That takes us to appointments to boards and commissions. Are there any from Interview Team A? Team B? Or Team C? Okay, thank you. That takes us into legislation for second readings and resolutions.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2314 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk, will you please read?
Ordinance 2314 to amend Title VI of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Health and Sanitation regarding updating and increasing fees for service and harmonizing Chapters 4 and 5 of Title VI of the Bloomington Municipal Code. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance makes several changes to Title VI of the Bloomington Municipal Code to bring the title in line with changed local practice, to increase service fees, to clarify references, and to harmonize current practices with the city code.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2314 be adopted.
Thank you. Mr. Wason, nice to see you again.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the council. Adam Wason, Public Works Director. Always an honor to be in front of you. Do you have the slides, Stephen? Yeah, perfect. I'm not going to go over all the slides that we've gone over multiple times so far this summer, but just want to recognize that, I very much recognize at the core the decision that is in front of the council tonight is very much a policy decision, very much a decision of that has some that the policy decision on how we fund sanitation is what is in front of you. So. In the end, for me as the Public Works Director, my biggest concern is that we are replacing capital on schedules that make sense and that are responsible and reasonable for the sanitation division. I very much understand that there's a difference of opinion on how this should be done, whether it should be done with the ratepayers of sanitation services fully funding that service, or if it should be more general fund property taxes. I get that. But for me, it's about running the sanitation division to the best of our abilities and making sure we're being responsible with our capital replacement. How that funding comes along is very much what's in front of you folks as the decision this evening. I've had a lot of really good conversations over the last week with several council members trying to answer questions and understand where their perceptions, their perspectives are, and I hope those were fruitful as well. As you can see here is what is in the current ordinance as proposed as far as a rate structure from 2023 or for 2024 and beyond. It is a per gallon cost that is equal for each of the cart sizes, which is a pretty big shift for us. We've previously had it where the larger cart sizes paid more per gallon than the smaller cart sizes, but this makes it equitable across all three cart sizes, and it is a gradual reduction of the amount of general fund support that is expected to be needed to cover the difference between the revenues we bring in and the expenses to operate sanitation. I'll open it up to questions, and again, do appreciate the policy nature of the discussion.
I believe we also have an amendment pending as well, but are there questions for Mr. Wason before we go to that? Seeing none, is there an amendment? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, I'd like to, I'm not sure if the amendment is numbered. There it is. Yes, amendment number 1. I'd like to move amendment 1 to ordinance 2314.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded.
So, as the synopsis says, this amendment would remove the escalating solid waste disposal service fees that would otherwise apply as the ordinance is currently written, starting in 2025 and going through 2029. The amendment would leave in place a proposed increase to the solid waste disposal service fee that would apply starting on January 1st, 2024. And I'm happy to explain the rationale. So we heard from Mr. Wason last week and in prior meetings that this first year bump in 2024 is largely reflective of rising costs and the desire to get on a capital replacement cycle that is more adequate for the needs of sanitation services. And the rest of the fee increases over the next 5 years that are being struck with this amendment would be removing, essentially slowly stepping down the general fund support so that sanitation will ultimately in 2029 have been supported fully by fees. So again, 2 parts essentially. The first year bump was rising costs, capital replacement cycles. The rest of the escalation was about reducing general fund support. So with this amendment, it would essentially strike that second category of impact and simply get us in a place that is, again, on good capital replacement cycles and largely mirroring the policy approach of the last several years, which is about $1 million annual support from the general fund. I should be clear that I would vote in favor of the ordinance as it's written now without this amendment, but it seemed from last week's conversation and discussion among the council that that is unlikely to pass. So I just want to mention that, A, to voice what I still believe is the right policy outcome, but B, note that just in case there are a majority of colleagues who would in fact pass the ordinance as written, please share that as we discuss this amendment, because I would prefer that outcome. But again, don't expect that. I think that's it. I guess, to me, this is a better outcome than not passing a fee increase at all, because if we don't pass any sort of fee increase in face of rising costs and a too slow capital replacement time cycle, then we'll just have to increase the general fund support for sanitation fees. Of course, that comes with the benefit for the folks who would receive the benefit, namely the households that receive city trash service. But that's coming from the general fund, which everybody pays into, and there's a whole segment of the community, largely in multifamily housing, that does not receive this benefit. So that's why I and others have been increasingly uncomfortable with the large general fund support, and why I would be opposed to the size of the general fund support increasing. So I think that's my rationale for the amendment, and I'm happy to answer questions from folks.
Thank you. Are there questions for the sponsor?
Can we hear staff's recommendation?
Mr. Wason?
So, again, Adam Wason. Staff's preference was probably to go with a longer period of time to reduce the general fund support. That was what the administration came forward with as the initial proposals. And that still is probably that's still the goal, but we also recognize that I also recognize that we need to get a rate structure passed that's going to allow us to purchase a truck next year. We need to, so I would support this. It's not certain that we wouldn't be back in front of the council again next year, asking for rates for 2025, depending on what priorities are going forward. So at this point, I think we could support this, knowing that it at least hopefully provides enough revenue for a truck. So, yes, we could support it.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Volin.
For the sponsor, it's one thing to cut the progressive decrease in the general fund subsidy, but could the ladder of prices not have been adjusted for cost of living by, say, 2% per year to reflect the fact that Public Works' costs have been going up and that this is a flat rate increase?
They certainly could. That's not a bad idea. Perhaps even possible to accomplish on the fly this evening with another amendment. Maybe not. Sorry, going to make staff nervous. My feeling is this: where we are right now with a sort of tightly divided council on this question of what is the appropriate balance of fees versus general fund tax revenue, on the basis that not everyone's getting the service. It seems to me we have a new administration, a new council in a year. I think we're just as likely to revisit this in the next year or two and think about what a sustainable escalation pattern is for the future. So it seems like there's a lot of change, essentially, coming. I'm not opposed to what you just suggested, a cost of living adjustment that's quite minimal from next year on, but didn't contemplate that in proposing this amendment.
If I can direct the question to Mr. Lucas, is it a troublesome thing to do to just say, and the rates shall increase at 2% per year thereafter? Or do we have to put in each number?
I think it would not be troublesome to amend the amendment. We might want to take a brief recess if that's the will of the council to get that in writing. Whether it's laid out in a table or a set percentage, I don't think it matters. You might want to check with Mr. Wason on whether he has a preference between those two.
If I...
Why don't we give Mr. Wason a chance
Sure.
to comment? Mr. Wason?
Sorry, I'm frantically searching average CPI over the last 20 years, and what, you know.
Give us a number.
Well, I wasn't able to get there yet. Would this help us into the future? Yes, I think an amendment like this could also help with, you know, possible uncertainty of 2025 if we don't address this again in 2024. A 2 to 3%. So what I would tell you is our current contract with Hoosier Disposal includes a 3% CPI clause. Depending on CPI, year over year, there's a maximum of 3% increase that's built into the contract for our disposal and recycling processing. So if we were going to go this route, I would suggest 3% to mirror that. And that does help with some of the concerns of rising costs over time. A lot of what we're doing here is also, most of what we're doing with these rates is a lot of projections into the future of unknowns. You know, what will gas prices be? What, you know, I can tell you when we bought several trucks 5 years ago, they were about $310,000 to $340,000. We're paying up to $395,000 to $425,000 for a truck right now if we were to order one. So again, yes, I think a 3% CPI built in as a additional part of this amendment would help us, but I think we'll also probably be back in the next few years anyway.
Thank you. In that case, I think maybe I have a proposal that might be easy for staff to draft, that I would like to move to an amendment to the amendment, let's call it Amendment A, that would change the sentence, schedule of service fees for disposal of solid waste, to add a period and then a sentence saying, fees shall increase by 3% each January 1st. I could use a second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions for?
I'll just restate the motion. This is an Amendment A to change the sentence in Section 6, which is a title of the cart fee schedule, which said schedule of service fees for disposal of solid waste, period. Such fees listed below shall increase 3% each year on January 1st. I may have just stated it two different ways. I don't know if they're doing that for me, but should I put it in writing for her, or are you?
We'll have that here and display it in just a moment.
While they're doing it, I'd be welcome discussion.
Are there questions? Councilmember Flaherty.
The clause might need to say beginning January 1st, 2025, or something like that, since we've specified a
Good point.
specific
I hope
amount.
that staff will hear
1st,
that and include it.
2024.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Smith.
I'm just trying to clarify in the subsections that are struck, that it's also the part that references the elimination of the general fund subsidy, correct? Right? Okay. Yes?
Yeah, the original amendment on the table. The goal is to keep the general fund support roughly equivalent to what it has been for the last 5+ years.
Thank you, Councilman Flaherty.
Additional questions? So just to clarify, I'll take a turn here. So just to clarify, the 3% increase that you're proposing would take place every year, even beyond January 1, 2024?
Yes, the idea here is that regardless of what happens, if this issue were to be taken up next year, at least, as Mr. Wason pointed out, that, you know, if they're planning for the 2025 budget, they're going to be doing that earlier than we consider it in August. And this gives them security in the knowledge that, well, we're trying to stay on the truck replacement schedule, but we're already falling behind because this is a one-time increase. So fees listed below shall increase 3% each year on January 1st, beginning January 1st, 2025. That's I agree with the wording here presented by staff, and offer it as the Amendment A.
Does this not, a follow-up question, does this not lock us in then to a 3% increase? What if there is a desire to have a greater than 3% increase?
That's a very good question. I guess you could say I don't know what you mean by locks us in. It prevents Public Works from falling behind if council next year does not take action to reduce the general fund subsidy or whatever. This is at least assurance while councils of the future decide what to do next.
Right, so it would take council, what you're saying is it would take council action next year if, for example, they wanted to increase fees by 4%.
Correct.
Okay.
Or any other number, yeah.
Or any other number.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you. Additional questions on Amendment A to Amendment 1? Councilmember Sims.
I'm not so sure who this goes to, but, I mean, we got two floating amendments, so does what Councilmember Volan is saying, is that taking the place of the Amendment 1?
It amends Councilmember Flaherty's amendment.
It's Amendment A to Amendment 1.
To say what? I mean, I guess,
It's a change to Councilmember Flaherty's language that adds back 3% CPI.
and you're okay with
It's
it?
highlighted on the screen.
And you're okay with your amendment, with your numbers gone, and replace that with 3% for the duration?
Starting in January 1st, 2025, yeah.
Until 29, or whenever it's length it goes?
Indefinitely.
Indefinitely, which changes everything that you amended in the first place. Okay, now I'm clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Seeing none, let us go to the public for comment on Amendment A to Amendment 01. Is there anyone in chambers who would like to offer comment? And Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public on Zoom that would like to speak to this amendment to the amendment, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom, by clicking your reactions button or the more button, or by sending a chat to the meeting host.
Okay, I'm not seeing any requests here in chambers. Are we seeing any on Zoom? Okay, well, as soon as we're done with public comment, we'll come back to
I
it.
didn't see there was anyone there. So.
Okay. Mr. Lucas, anyone? No? Okay. Let's come back to council questions on Amendment A to Amendment 1.
Again,
Councilmember
in my
Sims.
mind, there's almost two different things. So if I like one but not the other, and I vote one down, does that wipe the entire amendment out?
No.
So what are we voting on? Councilmember Amendment A?
We're
Or
voting on
1B?
Amendment A to Amendment 1. So Amendment
Thank you.
A
Okay,
is
okay.
what adds
I'm with
the
you. Thank you.
percentage increase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Additional questions? Okay. Any final comments on Amendment A to Amendment 1? Councilmember Flaherty.
Thanks. I'll be supporting Councilmember Volan's amendment to the amendment. I think it's a good addition in that it creates some more stability potentially for the years to come if we have struggled to revisit this question as a new council or administration come into office next year. And just to put some numbers to it, 3% is aiming to match the consumer price index, just cost of living inflation. Like, it's just meant to keep us on pace after we get this adjustment. It's really a catch-up for rising costs over the last several years. So for the cart size, the smallest cart size, for instance, we can see on the screen there, $8.75 in 2024. That would go to $9.01 in 2025. So about a quarter to the monthly fee is what we're talking about for that cart size, is what a 3% adjustment looks like. A little bit higher for the bigger cart sizes, but in no case more than $1 for those initial increases. So I just think it's a reasonable inflationary adjustment, essentially. And again, I think we'll probably be revisiting this in the coming years anyway. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Volan?
Perhaps I've referred to it as sub-amendment A, just to clarify, because Councilmember Sims rightly was confused by when we make amendments to amendments, and I recall his first night on council, he had a hell of an amendment to an amendment to an amendment to try to figure out. But having said that, I agree with Councilmember Flaherty's initial amendment or comment during his amendment that I would prefer to see the general fund subsidy eliminated. But barring that, and since this amendment, I think, is what will make this ordinance pass, I just wanted to restore the understanding that, especially in light of the recent couple of years and the significant inflation that we saw, that we need to take inflation into account, and that while a future council might choose to put back, to remove the general fund subsidy, which again I agree with, this at least offers some assurance that we recognize that inflation exists. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on Amendment A? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Amendment A to Amendment 1 for Ordinance 2314?
Councilmember Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Sims?
No.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Smith?
No.
Volin?
Yes.
And Flaherty?
Yes.
Thank you.
That passes 7-2. Amendment 1 is amended. So that takes us back to Amendment 1. Are there additional questions on Amendment 1 before we go to the public? If not, let us go.
Can we display the amendment?
Mr. Lucas, would that be possible, please? And this is in the packet addendum on page 33 for those keeping score. So, but additional questions on Amendment 1? Seeing none, let's go to the public for comments on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2314. Are there comments here in chambers? And Mr. Lucas, while he's approaching the podium, could you please extend our invitation on Zoom?
If there are members of the public that wish to speak to this amendment as amended, please let us know by using the raise hand feature, which you can find in your control bar under the Reactions tab or the More tab. You can also let us know you'd like to speak by sending the meeting host a chat.
Welcome. If you would, please share your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Council, distinguished staff. This is Christopher MG, not of the chamber, but as a homeowner, resident of Sunny Slopes, user of a electric lawnmower. I support this amendment. I've sort of talked about this a couple times, and I think philosophically I sort of disagree with Councilor Flaherty, but I like his intention that we're replacing the capital replacement cycles happening. I mentioned before that I thought our rates were too low, but that having passed a lit with a bucket for essential services, that the subsidies shouldn't go away. I was going to advocate just sort of splitting the baby from 2026 with a $600,000 subsidy. But I think this is a long way of getting at least where we need to be with the great sanitation that we have, making sure that we're just kind of keeping up with inflation and costs right now. So I would support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MG. Mr. Lucas, do we have any requests on Zoom?
Not that I see, no.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council for any final comment on Amendment 1 as amended to Ordinance 2314. Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
Yeah, I would prefer that this ordinance passes without the amendment, but I don't think the votes are there. So I will be supporting the amendment. I feel strongly that the subsidy from the general fund is inequitable. It does not treat all residents the same, in that only people in single-family homes and those with 4 or fewer units in them are allowed to use, are able to use our sanitation services. And the people in multifamily housing are not, and yet both pay in directly or indirectly into our general fund. Furthermore, that $1 million general fund subsidy could be well used for other purposes that as far as waste reduction, composting, or even other needs of our low-income community. that could go a long way. So for those reasons, I actually prefer the ordinance without the amendment, but again, in the interest of compromise and getting some fee increase to cover our rising costs, I will be voting in favor. And I appreciate Councilmember Flaherty bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on Amendment 1 as amended? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, I'm sorry, Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. I appreciate the amendment because it allows me to vote for it, because I would not have been in support of removing the subsidy, which I firmly believe is a part of the public sector's responsibility in providing a basic, essential service. We have raised local income taxes in order to do that, and this allows me to vote in favor of what I understand to be the costs of living and the costs of doing business and the need to have increases in the user fees, but not to be in any way replacing our responsibility to provide this service from our general fund. So thank you again. I will vote yes for this amendment.
Thank you. Additional comments on Amendment 1 as amended? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Flaherty for bringing the amendment. I'm not thrilled with the addition to the amendment because initially I just couldn't support the original amend ordinance as it was. I mean, and I think many of my colleagues felt that because we're changing it because I think they believe there wasn't enough votes to push that through. So having said that, I will say this too, add a little levity to things. I'm really surprised one of my colleagues didn't offer to divide the question tonight. Okay, yeah, you got that. My comment is this. Capital improvements, BPD and BFT and law enforcement, of course, they have the benefit of PS Lit and have a 10-year plan to go along with that. One of the whole reasons that I voted for or supported the PS Lit that generated roughly $16 million was for all of this basic city services that we've been talking about, of which trash collection is one of them. Okay, I'm not happy that leaf collection went away, but I understand that's part of the compromise on a lot of different levels. So that's something we can live with. We have the ED lit. We're going to have a referendum. We're going to be talking about a water rate increase coming up soon. That's almost like on autopilot, the utilities, okay? And we look at this, and we look at that pot and that pot, and we'll put all those pots together, then I think you'll feel the full influence that is going to be borne on the backs of many of our taxpayers. I also think that, my colleagues are well-intentioned, many of them, and we use the word equity a lot, equitable. You know, in this particular case, equity is not equal. I don't want that confused. Equity is not equal. Equal is not equity in my mind. The $16 million, it's almost like, and I understand inflation and all these other things. Councilmember Volan said when I first got on the council and I was the first budget on the first month I was here, and yes, things were a little bit confusing those first couple of weeks. But I was learning the ropes. But what I was confident in, and I know this is on a much smaller scale, is you can compare the city budget to your own household budget. You can do that, okay? When my wife and I are income and costs rise, what do? Do I pass a tax increase to give me more funds so I can meet that on the backs of others? Do I do a GoFundMe page or something? No, you reprioritize your budget. You pay for what you need to pay for. You try to save for other things. I mean, I don't pass an extra 2% on my children because, okay, you live here, you got to raise, this. You can pay us so we can do this. I mean, you alter your budget and you make things fit. it's just cost. I mean, that's one reason why I voted for, again, the ED Lit. $16 million is a lot, plus with what we already had. And if we look at certain things and prioritize maybe some of the buckets, and we're talking the subsidy, we're talking $1 million. Now, that's nothing to sneeze at. It's nothing to sneeze at. That's why I was happy with Councilmember Flaherty's. It would add some more to reduce that a little bit, but it wouldn't be on the full backs of our constituents. But with this addition, that's going to be hard for me to do. My neighbor across the street bought a house, little 3-bedroom thing, small house, 3 years in 2020, paid $185,000 for it. Okay, and I won't tell you how much it cost years ago, okay? But at any rate, paid $185,000 for it. I was shocked, okay? 3 years later, they just sold it a month ago for $260,000. Now, where do those people go to get additional funds? You see, and if you didn't have the funds, then you can't afford it. And I know I'm not trying to push those two together for you all to see, but the reality of the matter is that we gave an increase, and this is more of an increase. I mean, why isn't the capital improvements part of the budget process like every other department? Like every other department. Yes, we need new trucks. I understand that. I see those trucks. I mean, they're working hard. They're doing what they're supposed to. They're crushing the crap out of our containers too. But that's what they do. That's what they do. So I mean, I understand all that. But I just feel this is on the backs of our constituents. And it's just going to be hard for me to support it. So I think with the compromise, and I do, again, want to thank Councilmember Flaherty, because I do believe, I told him a couple weeks ago, there's always middle ground to everything. And I think that was an attempt to reach that in order to get this through this evening. So, and it probably will. But, you know, I'm not so sure I could still support that. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments on Amendment 1 as amended to Ordinance 2314. Councilmember Smith?
I just want to thank Councilman Flaherty as well. I think this is a great compromise. I'm really against removing the subsidy. The city has enough money to move some money around and continue the subsidy from the general fund, and it just doesn't make any sense that it doesn't help that they do that. And I know we need to help make sure that Mr. Wason's department can continue on and have good equipment and everything. So I thank Councilman Flaherty, and I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Seeing none, I'll finish up. My thanks as well. I think Councilmember Flaherty's assessment was accurate. I do think we have a policy difference on council about the role of the general fund subsidy in trash collection and sanitation. And I think that difference would have prevented passage last week. So I appreciate this step forward. It seems to me to be reasonable. I appreciate the amendment to the amendment as well. So with that, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2314?
Councilmember Sims?
As amended, sorry.
No.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
And Rosenbarger?
Yes.
That passes 8-1, which takes us back to Ordinance 2314 as amended. Are there any additional questions? If not, let's go to the public for comments on Ordinance 2314 as amended. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom while I see a show of hands of commenters here in chambers?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this ordinance, please raise your hand in Zoom or send a chat to the meeting host.
Okay. I'm not seeing any commenters here in chambers. Mr. Lucas, are you seeing anyone?
I see no hands going up at the moment.
Okay, in which case, let's come back to council then for final comment on ordinance 2314 as,
Had one late hand if you're still.
that's fine.
This is Betty Rose Nagel, who should be able to unmute now.
Welcome. If you would, please confirm your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes. Did we lose audio, or?
Ms. Nagel, are you able to unmute?
Okay, good to go.
There we go.
I would just like to say that listening to several of the council members say they would have a hard time voting for this, that they go ahead and vote for it. That's distressing to me. I don't think that many of the resident taxpayers think that you all are subsidizing our trash bill. And I think you are also not pushing hard enough to see about pay as you throw. There are several members of the council who seemed to me to be pretty enthusiastic about that as a way to reduce trash. And I don't hear a peep out of them. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nagel. Do we have anyone else on Zoom, Mr. Lucas?
No, not that I see.
And I'm not seeing any here in council. So let us come back together to council for any final comments on ordinance 2314 as amended. You're all pointing at each other. What?
Just recognizing him, that so you didn't miss his hand.
Councilmember Volin.
Member Sims, I appreciate it. I also appreciate Ms. Nagel's point, and it gives me an opportunity to mention pay-as-you-throw. As Mr. Wason can attest, I had serious concerns which have been consistent since sanitation modernization was considered, I think in 2017. And one of the most consistent things I've heard from constituents, not just my own, but from other districts over the years, is those people who are very conscientious about not putting out their trash every week because they're trying to make less trash. They're making so little trash, they don't need to put their bin out. And I've always said that these people should be rewarded with a discount. That discount on the current rate is $6.50 a month for the lowest one. I had imagined a $1 discount so that if somebody were to, just as an example, I didn't know what the final amount should be, but in the case of a $1 discount for not putting out your bin in a given week, at most 4 times a month you would be able to get a discount. You'd still be paying, let's call it $2.50 a month for the cost of operating the system, which was the principle under which we approved sanitation modernization the previous term. And yeah, like this, there are people out there, no small number of people, who would like to know that there's even more. I mean, the administration consistently said that the 3 different trash bins are the incentive that you can get a smaller trash bin. Well, if we know that there are, we also know that right after modernization went into place, the assumption the administration made that the average bin taken would be 64 gallons was soon upended, and now we have about 45% of the bins are 35 gallon, 45% are 64 gallon, and a handful are the 96 gallon. So many people, 45% of the city, give or take a few percent, already get the smallest bin, and we know some of them generate less trash than 35 gallons a week. And we don't have a mechanism, even though the bins have RFID chips in them. My message to the mayor's office is, in the upcoming budget, if the Public Works Department doesn't have enough staff to make pay-as-you-throw a reality, give them the staff. That's another reason why, I mean, especially if it reduces the total amount of waste, you know, this debate is as much a debate between the budget and the climate as anything else. I take Mr. Sims's concern about the local income tax that we raised last year, although I think we had an extensive debate in council about how it was going to be broken down, and that we've, as a council, tried to hold the administration to make sure that just because they agreed one year they'd put $4 million to transit didn't mean that they would do it the next year. I think that we all expect that come budget time, we're going to see roughly the same proportions as was promised last year when we first put in the tax. But this is, you know, the concern about the subsidy aside, and it's a legitimate one, this is also a discussion about budget versus climate. And it's hard, and there's no easy answer. But pay-as-you-throw, like, I mean, I could vote against this just because it doesn't involve pay-as-you-throw. The administration has had enough time to figure out a way to give Public Works the resources that it needs to enable this service that citizens like Ms. Nagel are calling for. I have the 35-gallon bin. I don't put trash out every week. I don't need the $1 back, but the point is, other people do. Mr. Sims, you know, is very concerned about those people who can't afford the increases that we're talking about tonight. He's not wrong about that. This is a way to incentivize people further and maybe to cut costs at the same time. So, you know, I regret that I can't make that happen in order to make this ordinance happen. And I don't think it's a problem at Public Works' level. I think it's a problem with the administration's overall priorities. While I may differ from other members in what those budget priorities should be, I think that this is one that would have majority support. Again, the key here is in the budget, we need to get more money for Public Works to be able to have enough staff to do pay-as-you-throw, because as Mr. Wason will tell you, cart management has become the biggest challenge in the modernized sanitation department. Thanks for listening to my extended remarks.
Thank you. Any additional final remarks? Councilmember Sims?
Thank you. In talking to individually with some of my colleagues, the word that kept coming out from me was compelling. And I understand. I'm not quite satisfied that this is just a budget versus climate argument. I think it's way, way more than that. But I haven't heard anything that was really compelling for me to support the original ordinance. I hadn't heard what other incentives. We've talked a little bit about compost. We've talked about some other things. But what other incentives or what else have we tried before we ask for many more dollars from those that are already committing dollars? I mean, that was one of the things that was not compelling to me. I hadn't heard anything else. What else have we tried? I've heard pay to throw. I've heard a couple things, but that's just talk. We're just talking. What else have we done? What has the administration done? What has Public Works done? I mean, I understand the costs have been rising over years. I would just say this. When I was campaign chair for the United Way, and I do believe it was 2019, we expected a tough roll because it was headed into the pandemic. I think the goal was something like 1.4 that year. Maybe we got 1.2 out of the generosity of the citizens of this community. But many of the things that I learned while being the chair and learning about our community was the percentage of people in this town at income base that were close to the poverty line. We're not talking 10%, we're talking almost half or a higher percentage of people that were close to the poverty line. So yeah, I guess I'm blessed or fortunate that, you know, you could triple the trash bin cost. I'll be able to afford it. This isn't really about me. This is about many of the folks that, as you all get, stop you in Walmart, stop you in Kroger's, stop you at the pharmacy, and, you know, ask me to explain why they have to pay more. And justify that. I can explain it, I can't justify it. So those are just my comments, and I think we've had some robust discussion. I'm also not so sure, there's been an insinuation, maybe that's not the right word, that whatever we don't do or do, that future council probably will consider this again. And that to me is a little bit distressing as well. I mean, that's why we're doing this here now. And to say, well, you know, if you don't do it, we'll do this 3%, but we'll probably look at this later. And we'll probably raise it. We'll get different people. We'll, you know, that. And again, I'm not putting words in anybody's head, but that's what I felt when I heard that. So, you know, I only have one vote. I still think it's important to be 1/9 of those votes, and I will vote accordingly. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Councilmember Volan? Any additional round one? Actually, let me just, no, seeing none. Go ahead, Councilmember Volan.
I would like to issue a challenge, a rhetorical challenge to my colleagues who believe that we should continue to subsidize single-family homes. The administration actually did make a proposal to reduce the subsidy, which they could have used, although they didn't tie it to this, but they could have used it to give Public Works more staff to do things like pay-as-you-throw. The money that we're using from the general fund to subsidize single-family home sanitation could be used to help not only reward people who have the smallest bin and don't put trash out every week. It could also be used to provide help to the people that Councilmember Sims is concerned about. We could have money set aside to help people who have trouble paying their sanitation bill, since we recognize that it's going up. We'd have to build that into the rate, though, and we'd have to connect those programs together to make everybody feel good about it. But that effort hasn't been made yet, and I'm not sure that there's time to do it this year. I hope that the next council will do it. But consider that the money we're spending, even after we fix it, even after we fix with this ordinance, which I think is going to pass, we could have used some more of that money to reduce the burden that Councilmember Sims so eloquently mentions, to make pay-as-you-throw a reality. That's the cost of subsidizing sanitation for the sake of single-family homes at the rate we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Just a few thoughts. Folks have, expressed concern about people having to pay fees that cover the full cost of trash service without general fund support. That folks would have a hard time affording paying market rates, essentially, for trash service. And I think that's astute and accurate, which is why I'm so concerned that half of our residents don't get any benefit from the general fund. We're taking money and giving it to one group while the other group does not benefit. That's the distributive inequity, and that we just haven't really been able to grapple with, and it's still really concerning to me. Again, I think this, as amended, this ordinance moves us in a better situation than we would be if it doesn't pass, but as long as I'm in public service, I will continue to want to address inequities where they exist. And in fact, I think we just need more staff power dedicated to being able to look at these questions with a deep lens of analysis. I actually did some assessment of census data to look at who's disproportionately benefited, who's disproportionately burdened by a policy where everyone pays into a pool of funds and we give that pot of money to one group. The group that's not getting that pot of money, that has to pay full rates for all their trash service and have their tax dollars going to reduce other people's rates. That group is disproportionately renters, people of color, and lower income people in Bloomington. They are struggling to pay their bills. There's a lot of folks struggling to pay their bills. But that is a fundamental systemic distributive inequity that this council has failed to grapple with just at all. And that's still really concerning to me. I think we just have so far to go in developing a common understanding and framework of analysis for how to look at the data that demonstrates deep racial, social inequity in a lot of policies. That's with respect to where, general fund dollars are going and where they're not, and who gets the benefit and who doesn't. In conversations with Councilmember Sims, though, and he's done, I think, an important job of pointing out that there are other layers of inequity here besides that particular systemic inequity. In both of those groups, in the group that's getting city trash service and in the group that is not, there are folks that are just doing just fine, and there are folks that are struggling to pay their bills. There are people in both of those camps who are struggling, and it goes to a broader policy implication of when we talk about city services, water fees, trash fees, all the rest, flat rates that everybody pays the same are also fundamentally inequitable. We should really be looking at, especially for income qualified folks, what options are there to pay less, to pay a smaller proportion of their income for basic services, because the proportion of their income going to services and having to make trade-offs between food and medicine and keeping the lights on are just that much more real. So those things get really challenging when we start to try to talk about percent of income payment plans or programs like we have at City of Bloomington Utilities that can help folks with the payment plan when they need it. I'm glad that program's in place. I'm not convinced it's enough. And what I'm hearing from Councilmember Sims in particular, and what I think I agree with, is that we could do better from finding policy tools and assistance for the folks who are struggling, regardless of which camp you fall in on this sanitation service issue or others. And so I wanted to give voice to that too, that there are multiple layers of equity issues in this entire kind of policy context that we're talking about, and I think they're all worthy of addressing, even though our discussion about general fund contribution to sanitation fees is largely centered around the equity issue of who benefits and who is burdened by that particular policy choice. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? It is round two. That was round two. Do you have round three? Councilmember Sims.
This will be very brief. And again, I really appreciate my colleagues just talking things out, even if we may disagree on some things, but being able to talk it out, I think, is okay. But I hear the trash, for an example, that people of color and others are inequitably treated or represented due to the cost there. And I do believe in one of our conversations, I said, well, name me one thing, one social ill that is not disparately represented by people of color or black people or lower income folks. No matter what your social ill is, it's always going to be disproportionately populated by those less fortunate in our community. That's it. I just listened to a report the other day. Even though the black or African American, black American population is less than 4%, make up over 20% of the residents in our correctional facility. And that's just one. You see? So again, with lived experiences and all these sorts of things, that's what leads me to say and vote the way I feel. Still love my colleagues, even if we disagree. And I think many of them have listened, and I truly, truly appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments in round three? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, you have a puzzled look on your face.
Can I start round four?
No. Actually, no. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on ordinance 2314 as amended?
Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Scambalori.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Volin.
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Rosenberger.
Yes.
And Sims.
I'm sorry, no.
That passes 8-1. Thank you, everyone.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2315 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. That passes. Will the clerk please read?
To amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Administration and Personnel regarding amending 2.76.040 entitled Boundaries to expand the service area of the Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance is sponsored by Councilmember Volin. It would authorize Bloomington Transit to expend services within the boundaries of Monroe County through appropriate interlocal agreements that specify exact areas and equitable funding mechanisms for those services.
Thank you.
I move that ordinance 2315 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Volin.
Thank you. I'm here to present ordinance 2315, which is talking about giving Bloomington Transit permission to provide service outside city limits. This ordinance basically is BT permission to operate countywide. One of the consequences of the ordinance is that it will remove doubt among non-city entities such as Monroe County or the town of Ellettsville as to whether BT will be allowed to provide service if they negotiate an agreement. This has been a concern for more than a year, which led to the resolution I authored last year asking council to endorse the idea that's before you tonight. But one of the consequences of this ordinance will be that it will remove a layer of oversight from this body, which we can argue that maybe it's been too restrictive, but it leaves us only with the ability to approve the BT budget as a way to express our concern with what deals they may negotiate with entities outside the city. So the council might prefer to tailor a mandate that's less expansive than what's being proposed tonight. One of the first important points I want to highlight tonight is that this is one of the most significant change to Bloomington Transit since the origin of public transit in Bloomington. I say that to point out that preceding the Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation was Ordinance 73-1, which established a city Department of Transportation. I didn't get a chance to go back too much into the detail of the history of BT, but Ordinance 8241 replaced the chapter of Bloomington Municipal Code that created that department with a separate public corporation, the Bloomington Public Transit Corporation, which I think there are representatives here from the BPTC who might be able to talk about why that change was made if they would like, but it's been the reality since 1982 that we've had service provided by a separate corporation. And you all know that we vote and have always voted since then on the Bloomington Transit's budget separately from the Civil City budget and the other budget. We have a separate ordinance for the Bloomington Transit budget. There was a change to City Code in 2014, but it was unrelated to what we're talking about tonight. It just changed the title of the officer of the city that has to maintain the boundary map, which has always been contiguous with the city of Bloomington. This change is an operational change only. So it's not a change to the taxing boundaries of the city, it just changes the boundaries within which BT could theoretically operate. According to statute, Bloomington Transit has always been able to serve a limited distance outside of the city. I think it's 2 miles, maybe it's 1. It's in any case, it's not enough for the concerns that we face this year and that we have been facing for a while. This change also reflects the strategic plans that Bloomington Transit adopted at the beginning of this year. Their plan is called Transform BT, and it meets several key objectives in that plan, and it fulfills its primary strategy for meeting those objectives. I'll just quote strategy number 1.1, the very first strategy that they named in their plan was to remove the barrier to allow Bloomington Transit to provide service throughout Monroe County. This ordinance makes the boundaries of the Bloomington Transit serviceable area contiguous with Monroe County. So in a single swoop, it achieves this and doesn't require multiple actions to do. Second point that's important is that the Bloomington metropolitan area has grown. I have said on many occasions in council before that there's never been a time in the 200-year history of Bloomington, IU, or Monroe County where each has not grown in the decennial year, with the exception of 2020. And you heard tonight from the previous presentation, you've heard from me before about how mistaken the census count of Bloomington was, and that we have in fact grown. But nevertheless, in 2023, the third year after a census, comes determination by the Department of Commerce of what our metropolitan area is. And it's also the same year that we get a new map of the Bloomington urbanized area. And the upshot of the new map is that rural transit's ability to serve the community will be curtailed starting in 2024. This is the 2010 urbanized area of the city of Bloomington. I want to call your attention to the area between Ellettsville and Bloomington, and to all the edges around the city, because in 2020 you'll see some dramatic difference. Ellettsville has grown significantly, Bloomington has grown, and it affects rural transit's ability to provide service. Here is the 2020 map with the city limits superimposed on it. Also, Bloomington Transit's routes are shown herein. Again, you can see that they're limited to the city. Significant areas are unserved and will remain unserved at least until the question of annexation is resolved. But here you have the 2010 and 2020 areas superimposed over each other. And you see big changes. The county's urbanized area has grown. The number of people in the urbanized area has grown. Rural transit rides have a rule. They have to stop or start outside the urbanized area. They can end in the urbanized area, but they can't start and end within the red area. As a result of this change in the map, many of the destinations that rural transit could have served will no longer be serviceable by rural transit. And they have sent a letter, which I believe might be in your packet, or separately, that pointed out that they don't know what they're going to do, but they know that they can't provide many services that they're accustomed to. And the only practical agency that can pick up that slack is Bloomington Transit. Bloomington Transit, in fact, receives some money due to the population of the urbanized area. A significant number of people in the 2020 census were responsible for the federal government sending them money, which then couldn't be spent on them because they weren't in the Bloomington Transit service area. And now that issue has reached basically a crisis point. The third and final important point that I want to leave you with is that the expansion of boundaries doesn't guarantee that any new service will be provided, because it's not, again, a change in the taxing boundaries. The people of Ellettsville, the people of Monroe County in general, we don't have a multi-jurisdictional transit system, and that's not being proposed tonight. So this ordinance would not obligate anyone living outside the city to pay taxes. That would require a new taxing district that would have a BT board made up of people from every jurisdiction. If any of you are familiar with the Monroe County Solid Waste District, it's made up of people from City of Bloomington, County of Monroe, Town of Ellettsville. So that's a multi-jurisdictional government agency. That's not on the table here. And so as a result, what this is doing is giving BT authority to negotiate interlocal agreements with Monroe County, with Ellettsville, with any other entity. I'm not sure there are any other entities besides those two, but it would give them authority to negotiate contracts, and for those agencies to not feel like maybe they're going to waste their time because we won't approve the expansion. We're doing it preemptively with this ordinance. I have been careful in wording this ordinance to alleviate concerns from the mayor's office and anyone else that the source of funds that, say, the county should be using to negotiate agreements with BT should not result in an effective double taxation of Bloomington residents. Right now, we pay a separate local amount of tax for transit just in the city, and we, as county residents, pay county taxes. And so my concern, and I think the mayor's concern, and I think anyone's concern should be that if the county does contract with BT, that no money come from the county general fund, because we as Bloomington residents and county citizens have paid into that fund as well, and we're paying Bloomington bus taxes. So as long as the county doesn't use general fund taxes to make this agreement, I think we should be okay with it. And the language of the ordinance reflects this admonition. So with that, I leave it to you all. If you have any questions on this ordinance, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I think it's an idea whose time has come at last. And I would like to ask Madam Chair if they could allow representatives of Bloomington Transit to speak to the ordinance first.
Certainly. Would you like questions from council first, or would you like to hear from staff?
I think as any member would prefer to hear from staff first.
Let's do that first. So, welcome. I can't imagine.
Good evening. John Connell, General Manager of Bloomington Public Transportation Corporation. Joining me tonight is also James McLary, Chairman of the BPTC Board, and Board Member Doug Horn. What we are asking Council to approve is to give Bloomington Transit the ability to operate outside of the city limits. I think each council member is aware we have received requests for service outside of the city limits. We've talked about the East-West Express route that we now call the Green Line. We have funding in place to study the feasibility of establishing a bus rapid transit system. And we feel very confident that that corridor that will be identified will include areas outside the city limits. So it makes sense for us to gain the authority to operate in the very areas that we're going to study. In addition to that, we also would like the ability we have the operational capacity to operate and provide service, but we don't have the legal capacity. So that's what we're asking for tonight.
Thank you. Any additional comments from others associated with BT? Okay. In which case, let's come to council for questions. Councilmember Smith? Wait. Oh, you're just shifting. Okay.
To speak, you know me. As chairman of the board, a year ago, we embarked on a strategic plan. That plan was adopted by the board in January. This was one of the key features that we have. We have a consultant study which told us that we should be operating out of the city limits. We said, well, that's fine, but we can't do it. We've been addressing it. We're ready to go. As John said, we have the operational capacity. And we just need the authority to do it. And there are people who need service out there, and we can't serve them. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McClary. So, Any more seat changes, or, no, kidding. But let's come to council for questions. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot, all you're doing. Fantastic. I do have this question, though. I used to work for Area 10, and there's a real concern that the action that you're going to take, or that we're going to allow you to take with extending the boundaries, will prevent people from receiving services, point to point, doctor to home, those kind of things. So the note that Ms. Meyer sent to us about asking that, you confine yourselves to the urbanized area as defined in the census. Can you respond to that and kind of, give us a feel for where this is all at with regard to their concerns?
So the 2020 census redefined the urbanized area. And it's our understanding, after looking at the rural transit ridership figures, that there's approximately 30 trips a day that they're no longer going to be legally capable of providing, because the origin and the destination will be both in an urbanized area. So what we would like to do is be in a position to provide service to those individuals. Our intent is not to absorb any more than the urban to urban. So we have no intention of limiting their ability to continue rural to urban. This came about through the state. They reached out to us. They said, well, what can we do to help these individuals who are going to lose service? And, the starting point is, well, we have to have the legal capacity to help out.
Yeah, I think it's that, I think it's the, do I understand it right, Mr. Connell, that you are going to operate just within the boundaries the way the census has shown that it will be the urbanized area? Or will you be operating outside of the urbanized area into the county that may overlap with things that rural transit does?
So currently, our intention is just to provide those trips that they're no longer able to provide. The reason we want the ability to operate countywide is we don't want to be back in front of this council in 5 years when things change and there's areas ripe for public transportation that we're no longer able to serve because we stuck to, we don't want to piecemeal it, in other words. We want to have the ability to adapt, one and done type thing here. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of individuals, for example, the rural transit trips. A lot of those trips are coming into the city of Bloomington to do business. It's in the city's best interest to provide those trips. So our goal is to just have the flexibility to adapt as we need to.
Does that change the subcontracts with them in a substantial way that might disturb their financial stability?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you.
A similar related question, I guess. So first, just checking or confirming my understanding, there are folks currently served by rural transit who will no longer legally be allowed to be served by rural transit because both this origin and destination of the trips they're taking are in what is now an urbanized area.
Correct.
Is that correct? And when you say you'd like to meet that need, it would be providing that service on the same terms that rural transit does now?
Actually, it would be a service improvement for those individuals. We would offer next day consistent with what we're currently doing.
Would that be through BT Access?
It would be an on-demand service. So
Okay.
BT Access currently is limited to individuals who are ADA eligible. So once the negotiations take place and the funding mechanism is set up and established, then there are certain criteria that we'd have to consider. Currently, I believe the rural transit trips are $3 each way. BT access is $2. So we would consider what we call convenience fare to come up with a $3 fare to keep it consistent.
And this would be a new service, something that BT does not currently offer? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so the creation of a new on-demand service. And I guess what I'm getting at is where that will be available, I guess. So if it's matching kind of a current level of service that folks were formerly able to access through Bloomington Transit, and we're creating a new BT service to match that, is it only available in an urbanized area that falls outside of city limits, or will it be available citywide? Will anybody be able to access this new kind of convenience fare on-demand service?
Ultimately, our goal is to implement a hybrid microtransit system. So individuals who currently don't use fixed route transportation because they're just simply too far from it, we'd like to implement a program similar to what we would be doing for those rural transit folks. And we're in discussions currently for software programs to implement those type of services. It's part of the strategic planning process. This will actually drive the acceleration of that program.
So it's a little bit to be determined, and
Yes.
it might phase in terms of its geographic
Correct.
coverage, but start with where this
Correct.
particular service has been.
So we felt that the most logical starting point is to have the legal capacity to sit down and negotiate. You know, it's hard to negotiate to provide a service that you're not legally capable of providing.
Yeah, I think that answers my questions, though. Thank you.
Councilmember Volan. Just two small questions, and I do support this ordinance, but my one question, what limitations will BT have as far as urban to urban or urban? Are we subject to those same limitations?
No. So what
we'll be able to go somewhere outside of, say, Ellisville?
Yeah, well, currently, we're limited to the city limits. You know. Yeah, so if this ordinance passes,
Yes.
then we would be, have the legal capacity to operate throughout the entire county.
Okay. And will this require more vehicles, more buses?
Not currently. So the 30 trips that we were talking about covering for the rural transit folks, we can absorb that without any additional equipment. So like I said, we have the operational capacity.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Volan.
On the questions I heard on the other side of the dais, is it maybe correct to say that whatever fixed route services you're offering right now, again, for people who are too far from it, even if they have now been included in the urbanized area, they still are unlikely to use the fixed route service, and they will need the on-demand service.
Correct.
And combined with the fact that rural transit will lose some funding and have to cut back some services, this is one reason why you want this change. Is that a correct way to summarize it?
I think the primary reason we want the change is we view public transportation as a regional solution. Part of our strategic planning process, we want Bloomington Transit to become the mobility provider for the community. And when we say community, we're talking the region, meaning the county. There's the memo that we sent to the council had 6 bullet points, why we felt this was important. Some were environmental benefits, economic benefits. There's a variety of pluses here. I don't think I answered your question.
Well, I mean, we're just trying to sort of clarify the whole rural transit thing. And maybe, Mr. Sims, did you have a follow-up? Okay. But I mean, I think we generally understand it, but, sorry? Well, Anyway, I want to go to a different question, which is, do you see a route to Ellettsville, a fixed route service to Ellettsville coming as a result of this?
Eventually, most likely.
Is Ellettsville interested?
They've been in a few of the meetings recently with conversations about, the funding, how the future expansions could be funded through the county or the town of Ellettsville. We work closely with the administration. We would welcome a member of council to be a part of that process when we determine what's an equitable way to determine a funding mechanism.
That's great. My last question is, at least for now, is are park and rides a part of your future concepts, and could a park and ride not be logical outside the new urbanized area?
Yes. So park and ride was identified as a possibility within the strategic planning process. There are some, high-density developments that have been constructed in Ellettsville that may be primed for partnership agreements. We have 3 partnership agreements currently with the Verve, Atlas. Those situations, you have the private developers paying the fully allocated cost for the service while other people benefit because they're open to the public. So we see there's a possibility for that to develop in that area because it's growing.
So, but I guess to follow up, could a park and ride be placed outside the urbanized area?
Yes. Within the
Why
county.
would that not conflict with the rules behind rural transit?
Well, I think it's a completely different market. Okay. So if we were to do something with park and ride, for example, on the far west side of the county, we know if you drive in that way, you see the traffic lined up in the mornings, it may be ripe for a park and ride.
In other words, what you're saying is on-demand service is the kind of thing that we have traditionally left to rural transit,
Yes.
and which we want to enable them to do as much as possible.
Right.
When one point is outside the urbanized area.
Right.
But fixed route service can and should be available anywhere in the county.
Yes.
Great. Mr. McClary?
Yeah, sure.
Just a real point of clarity, the money that rural transit is getting for this service is going away. They will not have it, so it doesn't make any difference whether BT operates it or somebody else. It is going away. And so we're not, quote, taking money away from rural transit. The state is taking money away from rural transit. So it's not like BT is trying to take the money. The state is actually taking the money.
Are they not going to be able to provide service at all next year?
Pardon me?
Well, are they not going to be able to provide service at all?
They
next
will
year?
not. They will not be able to provide that service. And those 35 trips, is it? 35 trips?
This is fixed route service that they provide.
No, these are demand response. These are demand response trips that they have to schedule 3 days in advance. Like John said, we're going to do a day in advance. We're going to do 24-hour. Our micro transit that we did a demonstration and put into full effect in July is just kind of feeding into what this is going to be. So it's more of a demand response service than it is really a fixed route service.
Is rural transit going out of business?
No, I don't believe so. They operate in 4 different counties.
I see.
Monroe County is only one of the 4 counties they operate in.
Very good. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I just want to clarify one thing. This whole rural transit thing started, and the ultimate goal was to provide service to those individuals that were going to lose service. That was the ultimate goal. That's our only goal. We have no hidden agenda here. Those 30 trips most likely are some of the more vulnerable people in the community. The fact that they're traveling into an urbanized area of Bloomington, there's benefit for whether it be the business, the medical provider, that was our sole motivation to step in and say, we can help, but there's going to be some hurdles we're going to have to get over. This is one of those hurdles. There is no hidden agenda here. We have no intention of trying to absorb any of their rural-to-rural trips. That's not on our radar, just to be clear.
Thank you. Councilmember
to ask about the funding that rural transit will be losing because they can no longer do the trips that begin and end in the urbanized area. Is
So
that,
a point of clarification?
Okay.
Okay, so the 5311 funding is for rural transportation. Those trips that are no longer rural aren't eligible to be subsidized with 5311 funds. I don't know to what extent the 5311 funds will change. My understanding is they most likely will stay the same. It's just they're not going to be able to do those trips.
okay, so, well, okay, so actually my question is not related to that now that I think of it, but it is about funding. Does allowing Bloomington Transit to go outside city limits open up any other funding options for you all?
Yes.
And can you
Potentially, we
describe
could,
that?
we could go after, for example, the park and ride. We could go after carbon reduction funds to establish a park and ride. That would fall under the category of an eligible project. So there's a variety of different programs out there that we'll be eligible for because we're taking more of a regional approach now.
Okay, so these are federal grant funds?
Yes, correct.
Okay, well, that's good, thank you.
I'm looking at Section 3 of the ordinance, where first it notes, as Councilmember Volin did in the presentation, that any expansion of services should be funded through sources of revenue other than city funds or tax revenues already paid by city residents to Bloomington Public Transit Corporation. And then it also notes that any resulting interlocal agreements shall be equitable in relation to the level of support city residents already provide. And in speaking with the mayor, I know that's been on his mind of just what's the fair balance of any contributions negotiated with other governmental units, and noting in particular that whereas the city of Bloomington as a governmental unit used to contribute $1 to $1.5 million to Bloomington Transit, we now contribute something like $5+ million, which I think the mayor quoted as 60 some dollars per capita essentially. Right. Going to Bloomington Transit. So I was curious to hear more about your all's thinking with respect to what is equitable, what is fair in relation to the level of support from, new units for new service, because there's a variety of sort of costing approaches you could take. You could say, what's the marginal cost to deliver X? But that's not the same thing as, paying for all the underlying equipment, personnel, et cetera, right. That support things. So I'm just looking to learn more, hear more of how you're thinking about those types of negotiations with other governmental units about what's a fair allocation.
So,
Mr. Connell, but if you wanted to weigh in, I'd be happy to hear it as well.
Let me just start. So the city, this past year is the first year that the city appropriated money directly to Bloomington Transit, and that was in the form of the LIT. The 1.5 that you speak of is from our taxing authority as the Transit Corporation, independent authority. So if you added those two together, and you come up with, roughly $5.5 million. So there's a variety of different ways that you could look at this in terms of a per capita. So for example, let's see here. So in 2022, our federal formula funds were $4.1 million. Of that $4.1 million, 28% was generated from residents outside of the city. So, I think that's significant to note. So to answer your question, I would say there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of future discussions to come up with what's equitable. And we plan to work very closely with the administration. We would welcome a member of council to participate in the process. But that's going to be the next key step. This is step one.
No, that makes sense. And again, broadly supportive of the initiative and what we're trying to do here, but at the same time have, fiscal responsibility of City of Bloomington in mind and just being responsive to our residents and again, what is fair. And in particular, what gave me some pause, I guess, in considering this ordinance is it's not an interlocal agreement among all interested parties. It would be between Bloomington Transit and the new units. So what they and you come to agree might be equitable or fair might not be the same conclusion that either the mayoral administration or city council reaches. And so that's what gave me a little bit of pause. We're kind of saying this shall meet X expectation, but we're kind of giving up our role in helping to determine what is really a complicated analysis based on some of the figures you just shared.
Well, I think you have regulatory authority over that process when it comes to budget time. When you see that we have revenue posted for service outside the city that you don't feel is equitable, then that would be a discussion at the budget hearing, because this body has the ultimate authority to approve the BPTC budget. But prior to that, we wouldn't want it to get to that point. We would want buy-in from both the city administration, this council, and the board. Quite simply put, we don't have the resources to go out and provide service into the county without a corresponding revenue source, and that's not our intention. But there's a process that we're going to have to determine what is equitable, and that's step 2.
I appreciate those comments and thoughts, and I appreciate the suggestion of including a council member in that process as well. Thank you.
Or that the mayor's most specific concern was, again, that issue of double taxation. If any money comes out of the county general fund, then effectively we've paid more than once as city residents who are also by default county residents. I took his concern seriously and agreed with him, and that's why I put the language in that I did.
Okay. Seeing none, let's go to public comment then on ordinance 2315, sorry. I'm seeing a couple folks approach the podium here. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this item, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom. You can do that by finding the raise hand button in your control bar, by clicking the reactions tab or the more tab. If you can't locate it, you can also send a chat to the meeting host to let us know you'd like to speak.
Okay. And if you would, sign in, please, and then you'll have 3 minutes. Mr. Lucas, well, I'll come back to that. Let's start here in chambers. Please, welcome.
Good evening, council, distinguished staff. It's Christopher MG on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. I have my name tag on. I want to thank Councilman Volan for sponsoring this piece of legislation, championing it in the community, and I want to thank Director of BT, John Connell, for putting up with my incessant push and with meeting me personally and sort of educating me on this issue. It was 4 years ago that the Chamber put on its Transit Summit in this very building, trying to get this particular historic piece of legislation passed that sort of opens up transit to everyone. And I can't help but say that we're getting into the sort of nuts and bolts of what I think BT Transit, the Director John Connell, and the board is going to do. What this legislation does is empower them, who kind of know some of these complications, and then your oversight is within that budget process on an annual basis. I mean, this is a necessary step for public transit system to be even better for the city residents, including employers and people who work in an urbanized area here in Monroe County. The thing is, citizens are going from here to areas outside of the city limits. It's a benefit to those citizens here. It's not, everything doesn't just stop at the city limits. We don't think on those terms. I mean, we understand that lifting these restrictions does not provide any services, but it does, again, empower the BT to operate buses outside the city limits and provide the necessary flexibility on routes in the future that they find financially viable. A change in this municipal code provides a service what we pushed here in March, if you recall, that Route 3 extension. Well, this opens it up, I think, really to BT to go beyond just merely going to Ivy Tech and Cook Group, which they could get into specific contracts with them, much like they have with Indiana University. I think this is just a great step in sort of moving to that, where the constraints of our lives are not based on the city limits. Even with them, then there are many residents who need Ivy Tech to get and expand their professional opportunities, and who need those employment opportunities right around there. So we need a transit system that reflects the realities of our community and serve the needs of our residents. And I think the Transportation Corps, we're the only one that has or restricted to this particular basis of just being in an incorporated area. I don't believe Tippecanoe over at Lafayette, they're the same way, or any of the other ones. So I think this is an important step. I appreciate this consideration, all the work that went into it. Please pass this, and I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. MG. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone on Zoom?
No, not that I see.
Okay, let's come here in chambers then. Welcome. If you would share your name for the record, then you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening, council members. My name is Dave Askins with the B Square Bulletin. I don't have questions tonight. But I did notice some factual issues, and they've mostly been addressed sort of gradually and incrementally in the course of the conversation, but I wanted to condense sort of those issues into my comments. The maps, the difference between the urban area in 2010 versus 2020. It's not the maps changed, but it's not the change in those maps that has led to the crisis involving rural transit's ability to provide service. It's not the change in the maps. There was maybe an incremental change, a tiny change in the maps that has had maybe a little bit of an impact on rural transit's ability to provide service. But the real difference is a decision by INDOT to enforce a rule that's always been on the books. Namely, it's a rule about a rural transit agency that receives 5311 federal funds. Such a transit agency is not supposed to give rides between 2 points where both of those points are already inside the urban area. So that rule's always been on the books, but it's not been enforced. And because it hasn't been enforced, rural transit has been able to provide rides between, for example, Ellettsville and Walmart on the west side of Bloomington. Both of those are in the urban area, have been in the past. They shouldn't have been able to provide those rides, but they were allowed to provide those rides because the rule wasn't enforced. Rural transit was essentially observing a different rule, one that said, okay, we won't give rides between 2 points that are inside the city of Bloomington. So that's the way rural transit interpreted the actual rule. And INDOT has said, no, not anymore. Starting January 1st, 2024, we're not going to allow those kind of rides to take place. And that has pushed things to the crisis. So it's not the increased urbanization of Monroe County that has led us to this point. It's simply an administrative bureaucratic decision by INDOT to say, nah, we're going to enforce this rule strictly. Now, as long as we're talking about urban area, and I'm going to have to wrap up sooner than I wanted to, but let me just sum up by saying, I think one way of thinking about doing this is that what you're doing is you're not allowing BT to provide service. Rather, let me back up.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Askin.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else on Zoom?
No, not at this time.
Okay, let's come back to council then for additional questions. Seeing none, is there a final comment? Councilmember Flaherty.
Just to confirm understanding, I assume the city council retains the city retains the legal authority to adjust boundaries in the future. Is that accurate? Just confirming that there wasn't, some inability or things that would restrict that ability in the future.
Is that directed to Mr. Lucas?
that this ordinance would add language to our code, so it would take another ordinance to remove that language. And of course, there would be practical impacts once services are offered that the council would likely want to consider. But I don't think there are any legal reasons why the council couldn't either restrict to a narrower area than the entire county or make changes in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Final comments then. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
I just want to thank Councilmember Voland for his work on this, and Mr. Connell and the board of Bloomington Transit for their master planning and willingness to serve more of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Connell and board presidents and board member. You know, I asked those things because, you know, I worked over there for a while, and rural transit was right there in the building in Ellettsville, and so, you know, Miss Myers was all, you know, she's worried about that, and I worked with a lot of those folks that were taking those rides. So that was my concern, and so thanks for responding to that, and I just want to let you know where I was coming from, because we're all trying to do the right thing. So thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Okay. Madam Clerk, I invite you to call the roll on ordinance 23. What? Oh, sorry. Councilmember Voland.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's commentary tonight. Just as an aside, I'm eager to go back to that era between 1973 and 1982 when the city operated its own bus system. BT has only ever shown us ridership numbers since it was founded in 1982. Many of us remember Lou May's annual budget chart, or a chart during the budgets showing ridership since 1982, and he crammed every year on, and Mr. Connell is still having to cram on into one piece of paper. But the question of rural transit is not the primary motive for this ordinance. It's not the most significant issue here, regardless of how they lost their revenue, even though this ordinance would benefit the people served by them too. I just want to make sure no one is making a mistake here. A vote for this ordinance is, among other things, a vote for a more urban Monroe County. It's not like we have a choice. We've established tonight and previous nights, I said, how the city, the county are growing and have always grown. Not just in population, but now in urbanized area. We've been a metropolitan area since 1980. That means we've had people commuting into the city, or into Monroe County, for more than 40 years. It wasn't true in 1970. It's been true since 1980. You can see the urbanized area now. This ordinance is a decisive step toward a metropolitan area transit service. And it should be, because we have several examples of residents and businesses who purposely located outside the city limits to avoid city taxes. We shouldn't be subsidizing those businesses. Walmart is a good prime example, but there are other examples. If you want the city to stay the same, you shouldn't vote for this. If you want the county's total urbanized area to stop increasing, you probably shouldn't vote to expand BT service, because this is going to cause the metropolitan area to grow. And not everyone has been supportive of such talk. So I don't have any illusions about this ordinance being a perfect ordinance that everyone can definitely support, because it will have consequences. We are a metropolitan area, and this is a decisive step towards recognizing that we can't just stay in the city limits anymore. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger?
Thank you. I would like to thank Councilmember Voland and Director Connolly for this. I know Section 3 was put in sort of at the request of the mayor or in response to a concern of the mayor. And I think it's okay. I don't exactly like that it restricts how funding gets to BT in the future for new routes or anything outside of the city, but I'm okay with it. And I think it is something that we could change if we need to. I would like to just say, I think maybe over time, if we are starting to go outside of Bloomington, that the name Bloomington Transit could potentially be updated or changed, because I think just the name Bloomington Transit really makes it seem like we are responsible for paying for all the transit. But if we have a more regional system where our regional partners need to buy into it and pay for the expenses of the services they're getting, I guess I just think it sounds different and helps folks think of it more as the entire region where we live instead of just the city of Bloomington. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional final comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, I invite you to call the roll on ordinance 2315.
Councilmember Scambalori.
Yes.
Rallo.
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Volin.
Go BT, yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
And Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Thank you so much. So that takes us into legislation for first readings. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2016 be introduced and read by synopsis only.
It's been moved and seconded. All those, in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. I invite the clerk to please read ordinance 2316.
Ordinance 2316 to amend Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Animals regarding updating and harmonizing Chapters 1, 26, 40, 54, and 56 of Title II of the Bloomington Municipal Code. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance makes several changes to Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code to reflect current and best practices, update the dangerous animal definitions, add a deer feeding ban, increase the amount of certain fees, and add additional time to the appeals process.
Thank you. We will take up ordinance 2316 next at our regular session on August 16th, 1 week from this evening. So that brings us to our second of two periods of public comment. This is for items not on our legislative agenda. If there are any folks in council who would like to, in chambers who would like to offer comment, please approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak, please let us know by using the raise hand feature, which you can find in your control bar under the reactions tab or the more tab. You can also send the meeting host a chat to let us know you'd like to comment.
Okay, thank you. Let's begin here in chambers. If you would, please confirm your name for the record again, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Dave Askins with the B Square Bulletin. I didn't get a chance to finish up my remarks, but these remarks can now be understood in the context of the future negotiations on the funding mechanisms that will result from the ordinance that you just passed. So, if you think about the urban area, there's people who live inside the urban area but outside the city limits.
Yes. You are speaking on future, or are you speaking on this is again a period of public comment for legislation, for topics not on our legislative agenda this evening.
I understand that. I thought that in my prelude, I explained how I'm conceiving of it, which is
Please continue.
Sorry?
Please continue.
Okay. Do I get my full time? How is this going to work? Maybe I'll just see if I can't wrap up in the time that's already on the clock. Don't worry about it.
The timer did stop.
Okay. All right, so there's people who live inside the urban area, but outside the city limits?
Duly noted. I appreciate how Mr. Askins framed his comments. and that's why I'm allowing him to continue.
All right. So as long as we're talking about the urban area, there's people who live inside the urban area, but outside the city limits. And this rule that always existed, that INDOT now has decided they want to enforce strictly, means that rural transit can't offer rides now or starting January 1st of 2024, that, or it won't be able to offer rides next year that it currently does. So for these people who live inside the urban area, but not inside the city limits, who should have been providing transit service to those people all along? Rural transit wasn't technically allowed to, but they did because the rule wasn't enforced. So according to the feds, it should have been BT. Why do I say that? Because if you remember what General Manager John Connell talked about, it should have been BT because the federal formula that determines how much BT gets from the feds is not a function of city population. It's a function of urban area population. So BT has been getting about 28% more federal formula funds than it would have received if the funding had been calculated just based on city population. So given the new enforcement of the rule on rural transit agencies, one way to think about this is that BT should have to, not should be allowed to, but should have to provide service outside the city of Bloomington if it's inside the urban area. So the way I think about what the city council did tonight was that it allowed BT to do what it really should have been doing all along with respect to the urban area that's outside the city. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas, do we have any additional commenters on Zoom?
No, not that I see.
Okay. In which case, let's come back to chambers and take up matters of council schedule.
No items to mention tonight, unless members have questions. I suppose I will mention the work session that the council scheduled last week for this Friday at noon in the McCloskey room to hear from county colleagues and officials on their effort to find a new site for a jail. So we will continue with that as scheduled. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
I do apologize. I had a request to comment that came in through chat that I overlooked. I think it was when we were still in our period, if you'll allow it.
Yes, go ahead.
This is from Betty Rose Nagel, who should be able to unmute now.
Ms. Nagel, our apologies for missing your note earlier. So you'll have 5 minutes. Please confirm your name for the record, and then go ahead.
I'm just going to suggest that possibly the council considering the future licensing bicycles. I have a couple of reasons for that. One would be simply to have a census of how many bicycles there are. Another might be a way of making sure that cyclists are aware of all the rules and regulations in the same way that the assumption of drivers passing a license test are acquainted with the rules. And inasmuch as so much of the infrastructure in the city now is devoted to the benefit of cyclists, that it would be good to have them licensed. I know there would be some cost involved. I would hope it would be nothing more than minimal administrative costs, but somehow I think it's time to license bicycles. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lucas, anyone else? Good of the order. Seeing none, thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.